All right. Hello, everybody. I just started the recording. All right. I will go to this first slide here. I'm going to have a formula coming up on the next slide. So we're going to be talking about mind reading today. And to start with, let's use a detective illustration. If we were learning to be effective detectives as like Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot, and those books, those characters, and the books about them, right? Obviously Agatha Christie for Hercule Poirot and Arthur Conan Doyle for Sherlock Holmes. Those are really good books that really show a lot of good methodological thinking. Of course, they don't talk about and use some of the deeper stuff that I've shown you and the overall worldview. But still, they're great. If you're inclined at all, or we'll try those out, they can be terrific. People ask me what to read, and maybe instead of reading a bunch of nonfiction, which of course there's plenty of useful nonfiction, but yeah, reading Hercule Poirot's and the nothing wrong with Miss Marple, which is another Agatha Christie character, but then especially I like Sherlock Holmes and Poirot. And they demonstrate a lot of these concepts. But if we were to think about being a very effective detective, then if the ideal was you just kind of look at a crime scene the first time or hear some facts from somebody like a witness or someone coming to you for the case, and your ideal is to just solve it right there and then probably that's not going to be reached, right? Probably that's going to take you backwards. Right? And that's also not what I'll be showing you with mind reading. It's more like we want to realize that that's not going to work, right? It's not going to be reliable. And so that kind of ideal of like reading body language or just feeling like being able to like judge people right off the bat. I kind of have this archetype in mind of this kind of, it doesn't even, I'm not even saying it exists in real life, but although surely some people kind of have this identity where they're like, yeah, I'm good in business or wherever else socially because I can look at someone and size them up in seconds, right? And that's, I have quite the opposite approach to that. And I explicitly and expressly don't look at that as the ideal because maybe someone has those powers, but I don't in most cases. And even if one did, it would be largely like an intuitive skill. And just experiment after experiment shows that not to be all that effective. So instead, if we have the right method for solving a crime reliably, and if it's quite counterintuitive, where people really in practice aren't doing that, then that's the kind of thing that I'm giving you today. And I really do the actual steps on the next slide. I'm not giving you a massive checklist of things. That's too much. But at the same time, we're going to want to have some humility and method to being able to understand when we want. Like there's times when we're going to want to understand the people around us. And it could be a specific question we have about how they feel about jealousy or how they're going to feel about doing a project. Or you're working on a project with them and how they're going to feel like doing a particular action or whether they're going to follow through, or just how to talk to them. Often we'll want to collaborate with somebody, right, socially, romantically, or in business, or sell them, of course, on something, which can be looked at as a collaboration. Right, I certainly look at it as a collaboration with you guys, right, if you're, or when you're prospects and you're buying and then participating and then succeeding, right, the whole way through. I want to collaborate, and part of that is having a sense of where people are at, right? Of course, if you're dealing with a group of people, it's a bit different. And then the other thing that's going to be equally applicable, and also kind of both will give you practice, like reading, kind of working on getting a sense for other people. And what I was saying was including having a sense of where they're at so you can collaborate with them and getting to where you both want to go, right? It's very easy to overlook the step in life of getting a sense of where someone else is at in order to get somewhere with them. Often we'll just kind of stand where we're at and kind of metaphorically like kind of wave our arms and yell and shout for them to come over to where we are, or we'll just assume that they're where we are, and then we'll try to walk somewhere with them, but they're not where we are, right? They're mentally, when I say psychically, I mean not psychically, but like their psyche, right? Like kind of where they're at. But then the other that is going to give us also practice for our future selves. There's two ways that we're going to want to potentially read the mind of our future self. One is regarding commitments, and either to ourselves, like a goal that we're going to set, or an objective we're going to go for, or just committing, especially to somebody else, that we're going to be there at a certain time, or do a trip with them, or do a project, or hit a deadline, or do some task for somebody else, to make sure that that's something that we're going to want to do, right? Including getting it integrated in our mind, where if we decide kind of in one sense that we want to do it, but if we read our mind in the future and think, well, I might not really feel like doing it, then you realizing that will give you the space or the opportunity to look to similar thing you do with somebody else. If somebody else kind of agreed they wanted to do a task for you or with you, and they agreed enough that they're agreeing, but also if you're thinking that they might have issues with following through and motivation, then what would you want to do, right? You would want to have a sense for where they're at, but then you'd also want to help give them an inspiring vision and help break through any blocks, belief blocks or thoughts that might be getting in their way, right? So you'd want to kind of hook up to a vision with mind. We're constantly kind of wanting them to be like motivated, like hooked up to a battery, and then we also want them to be unblocked, right? That pattern repeats itself over and over, where your mind and other people's minds need to be hooked into their existing motivation somehow, like a battery, but then like motivation, but then separately we want to dissolve resistance and blocks, and both of those are going to constantly be relevant in dealing with your own mind and others. So you'll want to read your own mind, just like other people's minds, to make sure that you'll want to follow through, and if not, you want to do some extra stuff to help that. But then another thing you can do is like with cotton, and Jamari made a post about this that I have on the screen, where Jamari wrote, David, I swiped Cotton's creative visualization technique of daily dispatches to his future self. I use that every day. I block out time to ask my future self on tips and advice that got me there. It's like you read my mind regarding my post on Alchemy, because I said, here, I'll go to my post here. I said, mind reading others and your future self, right? So, and Jamari has been doing that. Oh, wait, that's what this webby is all about. Jamari wrote, like I read his mind, so to speak. Of course, I can't take credit for that, but I can't wait, David. Laugh out loud. I'll have pen and paper handy for sure. So your other future self idea is, so one is for like commitments and tasks and objectives that you might be doing and getting that aligned and straight. But the other is the idea of getting in the mind of your future successful self, successful in one specific way or overall in a few ways, and then being able to kind of ask them that self questions, right, and so forth. Trying to think how that might apply to another person. Yeah, well, eliciting the strategy, right? Tony Robbins talks about this for years, few decades probably. But eliciting the strategy of somebody else is similar to that, right? You're kind of accessing someone else's mind that has achieved success in something and trying to get what they've done and also bridge it over to your mind so you can apply it. And then so there's the kind of these two applications of mind reading. Right, the success, eliciting a success recipe or strategy from someone else, including if they just like a movie, right? And you're, I'm doing this kind of just simplistically. I'm not saying this is a super duper application, but just kind of gives a sense. If someone, or a task that's ongoing, if someone likes doing it, you might want to elicit their strategy for how they might do that. Kind of get in their head and imagine how they might do it. And you don't even necessarily have to talk to them to do it. You might be able to imagine it and kind of get a sense of how someone could enjoy doing this task that you're not enjoying doing. So strategy elicitation, and then separately the other more kind of commonly used idea of, or at least ideally used kind of ideal of mind reading, which is getting a sense of where someone's at, what they want, whether they, even like you, or they're going to be favorably disposed towards a proposal that you give them. Again, socially, romantically, business-wise, it applies. And also like how to present that proposal, or or like a vision, right, which can involve like kind of a describing an attractive vision for that person. So a sense of where somebody's at, and then plus what would work to get them over to where you're hoping for them to be, right? That's the other. So strategy, elicitation, and some sense of like conversion or influence is the even more obvious one. Okay, to further set the table, I think one of the big blocks to getting kind of mind reading, but again, when I talk about mind reading, we're talking about understanding someone's mind, not just projecting, like making ourselves think that we're understanding, or some kind of overly quick magical process is not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to getting understanding, seeking understanding, and achieving that, some degree of understanding. And it won't be total, right? And so then we prioritize the crossing off, right? The general alchemy process or law of implication idea of focusing on what you can know. So often you can narrow things down greatly, and you can avoid certain mistakes, right? Maybe you're not going to figure out exactly what you can say to someone to get them to do something, but you can at least avoid some major mistakes. And doing that, the accumulation of avoiding various relatively major mistakes with dealing with people, accumulating that over the next months and years is going to be huge for you. So just doing that is a terrific application of this. So our intuition about how well we know our own minds and the minds of others is really wildly overconfident and often. I just thought I'd read a couple of little anecdotes, and I can switch over to this slide here. I just wrote the titles. I didn't write the authors, but you can find the author. Shouldn't be an issue. I gave the author for Subliminal before. I think it's Mladenov or something. Actually, anyway, book's over there. But these are specific enough titles that you should be able to get them, especially since I don't have the spelling, but Mladenov is the name of the Subliminal, the author. So first I'm going to read you something from the book called The Righteous Mind. These are all about the same general type of topic, which it seems like a lot of psychologists, like PhDs and so forth, are writing about kind of based on this kind of overconfidence idea and ways that our brain predictably goes wrong, or that we misjudge our mind and other people's minds. And so these kind of like mental illusions, not visual illusions, right? But these types of things that you'll see as I give you examples. And I find these interesting. These books don't really give solutions, and the authors of these books are wildly off about things like I talked about evolution, right? And they're often atheists, and their political outlook is often government worship and so forth. So, which ultimately involves like approving of violence as a solution for all sorts of stuff, right? Like the world can be better that way. So they don't really benefit that much from this stuff. But in combination with alchemy, it can be pretty cool to read some of this stuff. More to kind of, it's interesting. You'll almost certainly enjoy it. But more, it like kind of opens you up more and gets you more humble about how well you know your own mind and other people's minds, and how off the conclusions of your mind could be. And we want the times in our mind makes it feel like it's so right and there's no question. We'd rather, I think, right, or it would benefit you to feel less, no matter how fully real and certain your mind feels about certain conclusions. We probably all at this point want to break out of that and feel less, because that really traps us, right? It really controls us. It doesn't help us. When we identify overly with our minds, then we protect that. But when we step back, we realize, wait a second, I don't want my mind like locking me into certain beliefs and contexts. I want to break out of that, right? And so I got to a point a while ago where I loved catching my mind to the act of feeling totally certain and then still being wrong. Right? That was great because I wanted to weaken its grip. Because I talked about with you having your self-image based more on method and seeking understanding rather than that you're already right, right? Then since that's what I was looking to for my confidence, so I can go forward just fine even if I was catching my brain in the act of being wrong about things I was confident about. So I didn't really have an issue there. Anyway, you might enjoy the books. Let me let's read you a couple of things here from the two different books. Okay, so he writes, Thalia, which is one of his research assistants who's good with hypnosis, hypnotized people to feel a flash of disgust whenever they saw a certain word. Take, this is the word take, T-A-K-E, for half the subjects, and then the word often, so these innocuous kind of normal words for others. While they were still in a trance, Thalia instructed them that they would not be able to remember anything she had told them, and then she brought them out of the trance. So you have these test subjects that are hypnotized to feel a sense of disgust. Some of them when they see just the normal word take, others when they just see the pretty normal word often. But it would be like if they read the word like, snot or mucus, something like that, right? Once they were fully awake, we asked them to fill out a questionnaire packet in which they had to judge 6 short stories about moral violations. For each story, I'm reading from page 62 in The Righteous Mind. For each story, half of the subjects read a version that had their hypnotic code word embedded in it, right? So they would, of course, hypnotically feel more disgust from that code word, but not for any real rational reason. For example, one story was about a congressman who claimed to fight corruption yet takes bribes from the tobacco lobby. Of course, this guy's a liberal, so those are the kinds of things they would think of. The other subjects read a version that was identical except for a few words. The congressman is often bribed by the tobacco lobby. So presumably about the same content, but had the word often rather than takes. On average, subjects judge each of the 6 stories to be more disgusting and morally wrong when their code word was embedded in the story. You see? So the exact same rational circumstance, but they were hypnotized to feel disgust for like no reason that was foundational, right? Just the hypnosis for a normal word like take or often, right? And isn't this amazing? And what we want to do with any of these stories, the kind of normal reaction is to marginalize and discount them and feel like we would never do this. Right? Oh, other people do that, but we wouldn't. What we want to do, as I've talked about in different ways, is we want to take a look at these and use it to catch our own mind in the act, or to just have a lot more, almost for our mind to have more humility when trying to control us, right? Or we could rephrase that and say more humility towards our own minds, but really it's my mind that I want to have less control over me, right? The more I realize that it can be wrong about things like this based for no good reason, then the more I need to use the law of implication, the method of knowing what's true, right? The more I understand that my mind, even when it feels very certain, can be misleading, then I need a different sort of foothold. The law of non-contradiction and thinking through scenarios using alchemy of adding elements and subtracting elements from scenarios. And on a personal note, when I'm preparing for alchemy, sometimes I'll come up with like a model for explaining things, and it'll feel so right, and then I'll still examine it from different angles, look to disconfirm it, even if it feels right. People have a very easy time being skeptical or looking for a counterexample when they feel skeptical, but it's doing the opposite. It's when you feel certain and still looking for a counterexample that you want to do. And similarly, if you feel like you are skeptical and you're looking for a counterexample, you want to actually look also for a confirmation example. Anyway, as I read, I'll just repeat this, but on average, subjects judge each of the 6 stories to be more disgusting and morally wrong when their code word was embedded in the story. He says a sentence that references something before that I'm not reading, so I'll leave it out. By giving people a little artificial flash of negativity while they're reading the story, without giving them any new information, we made their moral judgments more severe. And it goes on, though. There's actually an additional twist that's pretty fascinating. The real surprise, though, came when a 7th story we tacked on almost as an afterthought. a story that contained no moral violation of any kind. It was about a student council president named Dan, who was in charge of scheduling discussion between students and faculty. Half of our subjects read that Dan tries to take topics that appeal to both professors and students in order to stimulate discussion. The other half read the same story, except for Dan often picks topics that appeal to professors and students. We added this story to demonstrate that there's a limit to what we can do with this, intuition, power of intuition, or this just hypnosis of disgust. We predicted that subjects who felt a flash of disgust while reading the story would have to overrule their gut feelings. To condemn Dan would be bizarre. Most of our subjects did indeed say that Dan's actions were fine, but a third of the subjects who found their code word in the story still followed their gut feelings and condemned Dan. They said that what he did was wrong, sometimes very wrong. Fortunately, we had asked everyone to write a sentence or two explaining their judgments, and we found gems such as, Dan is a popularity-seeking snob, just because he's trying to appeal to both students and be fair to both students and professors. And I don't know, it just seems like he's up to something. These subjects made up absurd reasons to justify arguments that they had made on the basis of gut feelings that have been implanted with hypnosis. Okay, and why am I reading this to you before I go over a formula for mind reading? Is because really the biggest block that you and I are going to have about reading other people's minds is a great arrogance and overconfidence that we already know what they're thinking, right? And I'm not going to do study after study with you, but it's almost staggering how many studies have been done showing that people neither guess the reasons for their own minds, nor do they read the minds of others very well, right? If you know someone very, very well, then you'll guess their preferences and answers to main questions about what they would do in a situation better than chance. Not better than my son, but better than randomness, but not by much. And again, the overconfidence that people have in those guesses is large. Let me read you this. This is about knowing your own mind. I think I referenced this a while ago, very early in Alchemy. I don't think I read it to you. If I did, it's fine to read it again. Consider a simple, and this is from the book Mind-Wise. Consider a simple experiment where mall shoppers were asked to explain their choices. These shoppers were first shown 4 pairs of stockings and asked to pick the best. In fact, the stockings were identical, so 4 identical pairs of stockings, and the shoppers were asked to pick the one they thought was the best stocking. The researchers found that the ordering mattered. Shoppers preferred whichever stocking was on the far right, which was evaluated last, 4 times more often than whichever stocking was on the far left, which is evaluated first. Nevertheless, when these shoppers were then asked to explain their choice, not a single person said anything about the ordering of the display. The researchers reported that when asked directly if the ordering had influenced their choices, so the researchers, right, would then ask these shoppers, these test subjects, why did you make the choice that you did? Oh, no, they didn't ask that. They might ask that, but they asked directly, they said to the shoppers, if the order in which they looked at the stockings influenced their choice. And here's what they reported after asking that. Virtually all subjects denied it, usually with a worried glance at the interviewer, suggesting that they felt either that they had misunderstood the question or were dealing with a madman, right? So just asking them, did the order in which you evaluate the stockings influence which stocking you picked as better? Not only did the people deny that, but they just couldn't even understand why they would be asked a question like that. It just seemed like weird, right? That the researcher must be crazy even to ask that, despite the fact that it was the only possible thing influencing their choice. The order of the stocking created the shoppers' preferences, but these shoppers seemed unaware of this influence on their own minds. A couple other very quick ones. Okay, there's a network there's a brain region, abbreviated MPFC, but anyhow, there's a network and with a certain type of MRI, I think, imaging, fMRI, then you can see what's lighting up in someone's brain. You can ask them questions and stuff, and have them imagine situations and see what lights up. So when this network of the brain regions is engaged, you're thinking about other people's minds, right? They feel more like a person, like a mind to you rather than like an object. Failing to engage this region when thinking about other people is a solid indication you're overlooking their minds, right? You're thinking of them more as an object. Research confirms that this region is engaged more when you're thinking about yourself, and then when you're thinking about your close friends and family and others who have beliefs similar to your own. It is activated when you care enough about others to care what they're thinking, and not when you're indifferent to others. So an actual brain region lights up, and by default, it'll be used more when people are closer to you mentally, like in beliefs, or perhaps if they're friends and family, or perhaps it's just beliefs and your friends and family tend to share your beliefs more often with these experiments. This indicates that we need to consciously, or on purpose at least, do something or rewire something, so that we even do it by habit, to overcome this, right? So we need some method. And he said that this area in the brain is significantly less active when you're thinking about the minds of those who are psychologically distant for you. When Republicans think about what fellow Republicans believe, they're using that region. And that's measured. When Republicans think about Democrats, or vice versa, Democrats think about Republicans, a bit less, right? So much easier for us to assign evil to, someone that is very psychologically distant. Great, and then one last one, and then I'll be done with the reading part, and we'll get to the formula. This is page 54, about smarter. You can be a smarter leader, perhaps, by taking this stuff into account. He's saying, every business leader is charged with getting things done through people. This requires understanding what actually motivates people in their jobs, right? And personally, for me, definitely, right? That's a big part of how I make money and how I've created a lot of wealth for myself, despite having basically no other talents, as I say, is using my conceptual ability to get a sense of what my strengths are and weaknesses other people's are, and their motivations for sure, and just getting a sense in general. This kind of mind reading thing is a big part of what I do. But as I indicated with the detective illustration in the beginning, it's not that I figure out exactly what everyone's thinking. A big part of what I do is I realize there's a gray area where I don't know, and I act as if I don't know. So a significant part of mind reading, no matter how well you do this formula, and again, I'm testifying to you that it's very, very important part of my actual strategy I've used to create wealth and build a business, is humility towards that I don't necessarily know what someone's thinking. And I try not to project onto them. I don't suppose that someone likes me more than they do, trusts me more than they do, but I also don't jump to a conclusion that they don't like me or they won't do something. So and because when realizing I don't know, in one sense it makes me use the formula, I'll show you more, but then I still don't necessarily know, right? And then I'll try to create a situation, or just operate as if I don't know, and it's pretty easy to do, right? If you realize you don't know one way or the other, then you can design circumstances and make choices that take that into account, just practically speaking. That might sound a little abstract as I say it, but in reality, if you just realize you're not sure about something, then you can behave accordingly, and it can tend to be way better than just projecting certainty prematurely. You can avoid all sorts of problems, right? So sometimes a lot of business is just not imploding, really, right? If you have a decent amount of energy and talent, and you work with other people with even just a decent amount of energy and talent, then you can do pretty well if you don't implode, right? And so realizing where the gray area is and not being overconfident there is a huge part of not imploding, interestingly enough. You can basically design things so that no matter what the truth is about certain things, things can be okay regardless. Whereas overconfidence that someone trusts you or likes you more than they do, or that they're going to do something faster than they're going to do it, or they're more motivated than they are, or just discounting their motivation too much, or not giving people room to behave kind of heroically and excellently. Either one of those can be a problem. Okay, so I just had finished reading. This requires understanding what actually motivates people in their jobs. This is an obvious mind reading problem. What do my employees really want? And I'll just read you this one paragraph. Leaders have two kinds of incentives at their disposal. Now, I'll warn you, this is a little bit overly simplified, but it still is interesting to hear, especially if the humility thing. So leaders have two kinds of incentives at their disposal, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic incentives are inherent to the job itself, such as the pleasure of accomplishing something worthwhile, learning new things, developing skills, or feeling proud about your work. Extrinsic incentives are outcomes that are separable from the job itself, such as getting paid, earning fringe benefits, getting a bonus, or having job security. Notice that the effect of extrinsic incentives on other people can be observed directly because it involves an obvious exchange of goods for services, whereas the impact of intrinsic incentives can really only be felt and experienced like on the inside, right, like in someone's head. You can see that both you and others work harder when money is at stake, but the metrics of pride and meaning and a sense of self-worth are emotional states that you feel rather than see. As a result, you can recognize intrinsic motivations more easily in yourselves than in others. And then, without reading more, the bottom line is that survey after survey and experiment after experiment shows that people, like if you interview for example, junior officers about why officers might leave their job and go to private service, private economy, or if you interview bosses about why, like what motivates employees, then whenever we're kind of asked to evaluate someone's motivations in switching careers or in the career they're in, then they'll report much higher guess that it's extrinsic factors like more money, rather than compared to the people themselves, like the officers that are leaving for the private sector, or the employees rating themselves on what motivates them. That basically, employees will say that intrinsic factors motivate them to a much larger degree than the bosses would guess. That doesn't mean either one of them is right. Remember the experiment with the shoppers and rating the stockings, right? And actually, my insight, one of the things I can kind of share with you about that regarding extrinsic and intrinsic motivation is that they're way more tied together than it might look. And for example, pride in your work and a sense of meaning, money represents that to people. And you have to kind of walk this kind of weird line where it both represents it for people, and they have a bit of trouble admitting it, right, to themselves in one sense. It's a little bit like how people are very motivated by things that help them to feel not helpless, right? And while at the same time wanting to believe that it's not the case, right, in a sense. Let me clarify that, and then I'll go to the slide with the formula. So you basically want to incentivize people with both a vision that gives them kind of an intrinsic sense of meaning. You want to have them also have a sense of pride in a fine way, not in a negative connotation really, that comes from a natural connection, from them kind of seeing how what they're doing is impacting the end result, the business as a whole, the bottom line, helping the end customer succeed or have a good experience with the product, whatever that might be. So you want it to feel like naturally connected up, which might not happen by default in people's minds. It might help too. Part of it, you can kind of give someone a scenario-based vision, not like as a lecture, but kind of in the context of talking to them, kind of helping them see how what they do has a natural impact on the bottom line, the end result, the benefit for the whole team or the objective, and in a way that both gives meaning and pride. And then, and if it's a business, then it also is going to result in money. So it's naturally connected to money. And then if their salary or their compensation, their JV partner split feels kind of naturally connected to that and kind of proportional to that, then that is good. People also sometimes not even measure money. We all have trouble kind of having a sense, like how much is $50,000 worth, right? Well, if you're paid $50,000 working in a company, then a lot of the meaning in that is how much other people are making. especially ones that generally jealousy is going to be people that are mostly like thought of as your peers in some way, or they could be compared to you in some way where they're clearly inferior or in your mind. I'm not saying that's a good way to think, but realistically, or peers. And interestingly enough, people don't really have jealousy issues with people that they're not really kind of qualify as a peer, or that they're competing with in some sense. I see that like with my car, like in town, like people don't feel like they generally, there might be some, of course, I'm not saying that no one feels jealous, but it's clear that very commonly people don't feel jealous as well, and because they don't feel like I'm a peer or competing with them, right, with what they do. If their coworker showed up and won, they might feel jealous, whereas I just come across and that I'm respectful to them and it's nice and so forth. Okay, let's at this point get to our slide here, and here's going to be our formula, our kind of mind reading. Ultimately, it's a shortcut. It'll get you straight to where you're trying to get to without. I didn't put extra stuff here just so I could sound extra clever and give you more hints. Like a lot of what I've done is narrow this down greatly. Even though there's a decent amount of writing on here, I'm really getting to the effective and critical parts of the strategy. And this is also a little bit linear in you can do this kind of put a fairly significant effort into doing this with somebody and repetitively, or you can do it pretty quickly, but kind of going through these with a decent amount of effort, and you can do it actually pretty fast once you're familiar with it. And then it'll get you some significant amount of benefit even from doing it pretty quickly. And then if you really want to get it right, then this really covers what you need to do regardless. All right. So you need to be aware that generally even when people try to take on someone else's perspective to guess what they're thinking, experiment after experiment shows that does not help, and it can actually hurt. It can actually come to a worse conclusion than even just your intuition about what somebody's thinking. This formula will help. Will clear out some of the things that block you and help make sure that you're getting it right. All right, so number one is, so normally when we take on someone else's perspective, we're keeping our own like foundation and like our foundational motivations and kind of like putting on their glasses, even their shoes. We might say shoes, but it's not like even if you like walked in somebody's shoes, let's say you wanted to understand someone working at Walmart, and then you went and worked in Walmart for a week in order to report on it, you really wouldn't get a sense of what it's like for someone else to work at Walmart. And think about, why might that be, right? Well, you're still taking so much of the context of your own life, right, into that situation. Plus you're like an observer, plus you're leaving in a week. And really someone could work at Walmart and it could be enough money for them and they could take pride in it. Maybe you're the main income producer for your family situation. And then you take that without thinking about it. And like people will say all the time, oh, so how could someone live on minimum wage? And what does that mean? And I'm not really trying to make a political or minimum wage argument, but at all here. But think about that statement. The nice thing about pulling like a known cultural statement out is it really illustrates how common it is to get these mind reading wrong, and shows how someone might think of themselves making that wage, getting that check, and they think they're taking on another person's perspective by imagining receiving a minimum wage, like a check at the end of a week or 2 weeks with a minimum wage. But think how many assumptions they're importing, right? If someone's the main wage earner, or at least if they're on their own, they've been working for a while, etc. I mean, I actually did receive minimum wage, right? And what was my situation? You could probably, if you again, clear your mind of projecting, then you can guess, right? What was I? I was a teenager. I was living at home. All the money I made was just bonus to buy stuff I wanted. And I was getting some experience working. It was when I felt empowered. It was, I mean, I didn't feel empowered because I was making minimum wage, but just earning some money. And, you know, I had spent, what, 16 or 17 years, or I guess subtract 5 years before I went to school, like 11 or 12 years in school. And so, of course, I had no talents, no skills, nothing worthwhile, nothing of any value, right? I'd only been in school for 11 years. So everything I had was utterly valueless. And I liked it, so I thought it was neat. And of course, that is the case for people earning minimum wage. But the main point there is to show how easy it is to project so much or carry so much like baggage, we could say, in. And this formula will help you not do that. And step one is not going to be enough to not do it. It's going to be the starting point. If we want to know what someone else is thinking, but let's say we're talking to someone and we want them to like us, or we want them to not feel jealous, or we want them to do a task for us, then we're coming into it in motion, right? Picture it like if you're in a moving car or like standing on the back of the pickup truck that's moving and you're trying to hit a target, then the fact that you're moving is an issue, right? And especially if you don't even realize you're moving, then you'll always miss the target, right? If you try to at least compensate for the fact you're moving, that's one thing. But much better to have the truck stop first and then try to hit the target with a ball in your hand and you're trying to throw it and hit a target, right? Or you're aiming, a gun or something, bow and arrow, you try to hit a target. So obviously first you want to stop with the motion if possible, right? No one, unless they're showing off or trying to make it difficult for themselves, would want the platform that they're standing on to be moving if they're trying to hit a target. By the same exact token, if you're coming into a conversation or if you're in the middle of a conversation and you have goals that are putting you in motion, so to speak, your mind in motion, pushing or whatever, then that is going to greatly interfere with your ability to get a sense of where someone else is at. All right? Now, if you, let's say you're talking to your romantic partner and you want to make sure they don't feel jealous about something, then that fact that you don't want them to feel jealous, that can motivate you to do this process. But then you can, of course, drop it. Just like wanting to make money can motivate you to do a sales presentation, but while you're sitting in the sales presentation, do you want to be thinking about how you want to get to $10,000 a month? Do you even want that goal active at all? No, right? You want that goal to be active while you're deciding what actions to take, and then, like, basically, it should be active during a certain part of your planning and then be dropped. At which point it'll be worked into your planning. It'll be working for you in that sense, right? If you want to make $100,000 a month, then that's a totally reasonable, potentially reasonable goal. And then you could plan out a strategy or a tentative strategy or a semi-soft lock that you want to go after, right? You can refer to previous recordings if you're not familiar with that term. But basically an objective that if you really focus in, you can probably hit it, that'll give you a great advantage. So if you want to make $100,000 a month, then you just need that goal active while you're coming up with what to go after with full focus. If you have a motivation issue, then you can deal with it with the results formula, focus, desire, faith, and so forth. But you don't really need that goal active all the time, right? It's inherently, implicitly active because you use it to plan your strategy, which might be just focusing on a semi-soft lock, and then you might have a more detailed strategy doing that, ranking a website or something to get started. Do you see? It's worked into the plan, so you can drop it. It doesn't have to be active separately. So similarly, whatever it is you want to influence somebody about, and you could think if you're doing a sales presentation too, you might ultimately want to make money, or you might even want the person to buy, right, your service or agree to become your client. But if you're trying to understand where the other person's at, which is going to be a useful thing to do prior to the meeting and then during the meeting, you can do this. Part of this can take place, of course, while you're going back and forth with somebody. then you do not want an active goal of your own while you have a different goal, which is understanding the other person. And it's going to screw up your mind reading for sure. If you just realize this, then you're, well, like, it'll benefit you tremendously in getting understanding other people's minds. So once you're able to take on just the goal of understanding where somebody's at, for as long as that's relevant, and then you drop it again, right? Like once you achieve the objective within reason, then you move on to another objective, which might be traveling with them, so to speak, in like mental space if you're selling something, right? Or physically or whatever, but basically traveling with them to the point where you're collaborating, right? You're going to be able to collaborate with somebody else if you have a sense of your own mind, and this number one step incorporates that, right? And alchemy in general is giving you a much better and clearer and less cluttered model of your own mind. When you're used to paying attention to your active goals that are going on in your mind and used to trying to get down to just one, then, and one's a lot easier to keep track of than a zillion of them, right? And especially the self-image issue would pop up all the time until you reorder that, realign that with the idea of basing your self-image on following method rather than already being right, good, smart, and so forth. So you're already getting much more in touch with your own mind through everything we're covering. And when you have a sense of your own mind and your goalscape, right, your goals, and including ideally one, and that also declutters you for getting a sense of someone else's mind, plus you have a model for how minds work, the more you understand your own. So it's quicker and easier to understand another person's mind. And so then when you accomplish both of those within a decent degree, you don't have to you don't have to hit it perfectly, right, once again. You just have to get the general sense. You're just trying to hit a target that's kind of reasonably big, right? For example, when you're selling somebody something or trying to get them to become your client, then there's not like a one very specific set of words and presentation and tone of voice they have to use. It's like exact, right? You just have to get it you hit the target for them to agree, right? A kind of a reasonably large target, right? There's a fairly large number of things you could say to somebody, and so forth, right? So you just kind of have to narrow it down, and then you can hit the target. And you don't have to hit the target with everyone. Once you only have to hit the target once in a while in order to get as many clients as you need, then once again, you don't have to get it perfectly exact. You just have to narrow it down. And some people are better at this intuitively than others, but especially if you're not at a reasonably high income, then this might help you tremendously. This might be the only block you have left, is just getting a sense of your own mind and other people's minds. And then once you have a sense of both, then it's not that hard to navigate to where you want to go, especially in enough cases that you can make money, right? If you could just get 1 out of 10 of the prospects that you talk to, at that point it becomes essentially a numbers game, as long as it's numbers of qualified traffic. It's not a numbers game before you're able to do it effectively, where it's reliably going to have success in some decent number of cases. All right. So you can have all sorts of other goals in general, but just don't have them triggered. And there can be a sequence of goals, like that you want to make money, like that you want the person to become your client, if they're right, if it's going to be a good match, by the way. Like prematurely thinking you want a person to be your client isn't exactly the objective that you want, right? You actually probably want the objective that they become your client if it's a good match, if they'll operate within your velvet ropes. And if you're kind of velvet ropes, your system that you have for them is good, right? You can adjust your own system, and then you can get to know the other person, and then see if there's a decent match. You don't want it overly restrictive, right, where not enough people can fit inside of your system, but neither do you want to, to have issues where your system is too vague and blurry, and you're getting people that aren't going to work well within it. Same thing with dating, of course, and same thing with joint venture partnerships. Okay. even what we talked about last time, if it helps you, you can even just breathe, like focus on your breathing a little bit. If there's an important meeting that you have with someone, or you just have an important person in your life that you want to have a good sense of, and if you feel like you have an issue with kind of calming your goals down and trying to get in their mind, then you can, if I'm going from memory, but I think it's breathing in for like a count of 4, holding for 16, breathing out for 8, can help. This is a more of an internally focused exercise in when you're doing it, especially in the absence of the other person. But even when they're there, being in more like an alpha state, which is 1 degree more chilled out and more internally focused than the full waking state of beta, then that can help you too, if you want little extra things to help you along. But this can also be like a split second, the more you get used to it, either way, right? But it's worth it if it takes you 5 minutes to take on the right goal for an important situation or an important person in your life, then it's worth it. If it takes you an hour, it's probably worth it, right? Just depending. All right. I say quick results formula on the goal of understanding the other person. You can imagine what the world would look like for yourself if you had a decent sense of, and for real, if you had a really decent sense where the other person was coming from. You could compare it using the law of non-contradiction. You can compare it briefly with noticing, what if I just feel like I really got it? I really know what the other person's thinking. I can cold read them and I can tell them you're thinking that, or I can at least act on it. And then is that really what you want? No, you don't want that goal of like feeling like, yeah, I got it, right? So I do this with my goals like this sometimes, or whatever it might be a problem, or if I notice myself having a goal that could just be a goal that ends up being more easily fulfilled by fooling myself, right, or just having overconfidence. So you want to picture really understanding the other person, and that might mean plenty of gray areas, but at least what you do understand is basically correct. And as you might say, well, how do you picture really understanding someone? Well, for starters, you can notice how you don't just want a feeling of confidence that you understand the person. That's not what you're going for. What you can imagine is you really do get a decent understanding of where the person's at, and then you can imagine you guys in rapport where you're talking and you're saying things that are really genuinely kind of effective for the person, or you're drawing out a vision that is attractive to the other person, right? So if you can just have briefly envision such a case where you're talking to the other person and it's feeling nice to them, it's connecting with them. So you can imagine even that you're the other person briefly, just to whatever degree you want to, and you're hearing you talk, right? And you're feeling it like, yeah, cool, like this person gets where I'm coming from. So you picturing that is an example of picturing the way the world would be, like a scenario of the way the world would be after you accomplish your goal of understanding the other person. So you're, just like with any goal, you're setting an objective of understanding the other person. And again, part of understanding might mean like some humility about understanding them, where you don't have every nuance of everything they're thinking or know every perfect word, but just generally having a sense of where they're at and what's motivating them and so forth. So that's just having the goal of understanding them, and then I'm going to get into understanding the practice of understanding them themselves. All right, so let's go on to number 2 here. Okay. Generally, this is the kind of thing your brain just isn't going to do, and it'll feel like our brain will kind of make us feel like it's done this, like, oh yeah, I get this person, I know where they're coming from, and so forth. And what your brain is doing is associating and projecting. It's pulling templates. It's associating, like, for example, if someone's posture is a certain way, then your brain associates that with certain mind states, right? If it's slouched versus if they're standing tall. And then, so your brain reads other people's minds through association. I don't even mean associating with a person, but associating certain gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, words. The other person can say something like act respectfully towards you, pay attention to you, and your brain will associate that with, oh, they respect me, they like me, and so forth. first of all that could be wrong. You don't want to do it regardless, but it's wrong. It's superficial. Someone could be paying attention to you and acting respectful to you because they want something from you, not because they actually like you or actually respect you, right? They could walk away later and be like, oh, what a rube, right? What a sucker. This isn't about, though, being suspicious of people or anything like that. I just want you to be suspicious of that method, that by default, your intuition, your mind is going to project, associate, right, on somebody else. That's how I talked about this last time. Your mind by default thinks by successive approximation and association, and like associating what this has meant in the past, if someone's done this or if that person's done it. This method is in order to, on purpose, do something instead. So to whatever degree you're just associating and doing something quick and so forth, like that, this is explicitly to not do that. So this is some amount or often training about reading someone's mind is about doing that better. As a matter of fact, most success training in general and teaching about how to accomplish objectives generally tends to be about using the default process to better, to its max. Maxing out teaching you more associations. Like, look for this. If their posture is like this, if their tone of voice is like this, if they say this, it means this. If they say that, it means this. Or in telling you to focus more for feedback and approximate better. Instead, I'm showing you something to do in place of that. Or at least not even in place, to frame it, to narrow it down. What we want to do about the way our brain works by default is to set it up for success by narrowing down where it's approximating and associating and projecting and so forth. Just like how I talk to you in general about how to achieve goals through the alchemy process, is you focus, you got to try to get a foothold of something you know, and you build from there, building more of what you know. That narrows down the gray area. That's mainly how you succeed, is you keep chipping away at the gray area, not by poking around inside the gray area, but so much as looking to narrow it down, right, to accumulate things you know. All right, but just make sure that you don't misinterpret what I'm saying here or think that you're doing it well when you're just associating and projecting with other people. Again, this is to check instead, or to narrow down to where you're not needing to do that as much. You'll basically have to do that, successfully approximate with them, get feedback, get a sense of what they're saying, wherever the gray area is, and it's better successfully approximating, kind of poking around and getting a sense of things, like you operate when there's a gray area. That's better than projecting the wrong thing on somebody. So pretty much entirely, I'm trying to get you out of projecting the wrong thing, and then I'm trying to help you narrow it down properly, and then you can catch the fly ball, navigate by feel and sight inside of as little bit of a gray area as possible. That's one way to explain it. Anyway, if you just follow this strategy, then it'll work out well without worrying about anything else, actually. All right. So instead of these associations and so forth, we want to be paying attention and immersing ourselves inside of the vectors. And this is kind of part of the kicker, including all these are really, actually, these are all equally important, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it really, all of these do come down to vectors. Number one is trying to clear out your goals and vectors. And the goal to understand the other person, when you set it up properly, it's actually not active in the sense that it's interfering with this process. Because you're setting up where it's not that you want to have a feeling of understanding, that you can kind of push to and it can interfere, but you just want to actually understand. Which when you have a proper goal to understand actually, then it can be active without interfering, without pushing and so forth. All right, so you want to take in their vectors, and I'm giving you 3 places to look, like kind of like a checklist. I don't like long checklists, but this is a fairly short checklist, and this will be very helpful for you to have an actual checklist rather than have no idea where to look. All right, try to apply this immediately to an actual archetype example. Try to think it to do the business one or the romantic one. I try to do business first, see how that works. So if you are looking to partner with someone in a business venture, and you're trying to think if I can apply this to a client. Yeah, okay. So you're potentially meeting with a client, let's say. You want to get a sense of them. Now, you might not know them very well, but you might know something. And by asking these questions, it also is going to give you a place to sort of navigate around and ask questions or pay attention to while you're talking to them. So part of this, if you do it ahead of time, it'll also open up questions for you. When I say wealth, what I mean is that for everybody, a major part of what's going on for them is going to be whatever they do to deal with being able to eat and buy stuff that's reasonable and have shelter and so forth. If they're a child, then that's going to boil down to needing to not like piss off their parents like too much, right? Like even then, that might not even be an issue because they'll feel like they're being fed and clothed almost no matter what. But there still might be things that they want to buy and so forth. With a potential client, then you can get a sense of where they're at with money. Like if they're kind of desperate for money, then that's going to be a very important vector on anybody. If they're pretty stable and secure, then that's going to matter. But this isn't really an intellectual exercise. You're not having to like add and subtract a lot of things. It's more like you're trying to get to where you feel with them and what their motivations are and what's going to appeal to them. You can't be like overthinking everything while you're talking to them and so forth. So this is the point of this exercise is to actually get to where your intuition regarding that person is more right. And it can get to the point where it's kind of astonishingly right, but you don't want to really care. You don't want to be careful about priding yourself on that or thinking that it's coming from anything but using this method. You don't want to accidentally use this method pretty well and then later on, without using the method, think that it's because you're so smart and special and you're so good at cold reading people or quick reading people. Be really wary of that. But if you don't do this, then you will you'll walk into trying to take on their perspective with your own sense of wealth and how that impacts you, whether you're kind of desperate for money and it's very important to get now, or whether it's not really much of an issue for you and you have plenty of it. These are really important factors. Like I gave you the quick example of people thinking about Walmart. And even just how much a certain amount of money means to you. It really radically varies from person to person, right? How expensive is the OMG coaching at about $8,000, right? When I had a lot less money, that amount would have seemed a certain amount to me, and then when I have more, it seems a certain amount, to me. Of course, numerically, it's always 8,000, and then generally, ideally, you don't really want to be like not mind reading a specific client. If you're mind reading a specific person, then you don't want to get to where they're at. If you're dealing with a group of people, then you're better off kind of getting to a sort of average, like kind of moderate amount where you're neither looking at, in this case, $8,000 is where you're too far on the extremities. Either it looks like too much money, more than it really is to most people. That might be your actual prospects, or less than it might be. Anyhow, I don't know. I want to make sure I describe this. This isn't really overly complicated. It's just such a major part of where a person's at in life. And if you don't make sure to orient yourself to where they're at with wealth, then and even think about making money the way they do, right? And what that means, where the money is coming from, is it coming from? If they work for the government, then they have to obey orders, right? And they have to feel comfortable about that. Undermining someone's way that they get wealth is going to really not work for them, right? And so you want to get to where you feel like if you tell an entrepreneur, think outside the box and don't obey orders or question authority, that's not going to feel threatening to them, right? And if you stop and feel wealth creation or wealth, taking in wealth or some amount of money as an entrepreneur, and you're feeling that, like you're kind of immersed in that, then if you imagine someone say to you, question authority, it doesn't feel threatening. Now imagine you take on the wealth getting of someone who works for government. In this case, I'm not being critical about this. I'm just pointing it out as a difference. With them, questioning authority could just mean getting fired and losing their pension. So that same statement would feel very different to them. And it's based on where their wealth is coming from in terms of their basic stability. I'm not even talking about self-image yet. I'm just talking about just their basic stability in life. So it's a huge part of how pretty much anyone is. Of course, how much of a part it is can vary from person to person, but even then, hardly, because if someone's, let's say someone is I tend to use archetypal examples as always. They're kind of easy to picture. If someone's a wife that doesn't have to work, of course you can be a husband that doesn't have to work, but let's just picture a wife that doesn't have to work. Then now their wealth is coming from their marriage to their husband, right? Or to their they could be married to another woman if they're lesbian and that person's providing. But again, sticking with the kind of archetypical example, then that still is going to really matter. Like things that are in line with that are going to feel right. Things that are threatening to that are not going to feel right. And it could be very different from you, right? Like wherever you're coming from, maybe as an entrepreneur, if someone's source of wealth or stability, you could put wealth/stability in here. You're just not going to be able to figure out where they're coming from or read their mind unless you move over to that big vector. A vector is like a force in a direction, or like it's kind of pushing them, right, or affecting them, or potentially affecting them if it's threatened. Plus, they're just going to identify with people that take in wealth like them. But you can adjust for that once you can see the world that way, right? But it's really a very different way of seeing the world, these different ways of having your basic stability. I'm not talking about like how somebody gets rich. I'm talking about like their kind of sources of financial stability, or a substitute somehow for financial stability. Like if you're a child, then it's not exactly financial stability. It's kind of more like a substitute, right? Like with your parents. But then imagining a child or a teenager who's living with their parents, that's still very relevant. That's still their source of stability or wealth, is that they don't really think about it maybe. Or maybe if they're getting closer to the age where they're going out on their own, then they're thinking about it in the future. And a particular person, you might not know this until you talk to them, some teenagers might be really thinking about that and worried about it, and others might not have it on their screen and not really think about money hardly at all and what's going to happen, in a few years. Sometimes you won't know that, but at least you can know you don't know that. And if you're going to be dealing with someone in that age, then it's going to be kind of one of those two, right? Or if you know that their parents provide for them, then you can at least imagine that, and then you're not sure then whether how much they're thinking about that they're going to have to provide for themselves fairly soon or not. But that once you have that question, you can find it out fairly quickly, perhaps, if it's relevant, in a conversation with a person. And whatever their source of wealth is, when I talk about checking this later on, they're going to feel a little bit more mentally removed from someone whose wealth, their stability is coming from a very different place, right? So if we're an entrepreneur and we're making money that way, then someone who has everything provided for because of their marriage, it might be harder to even think of, we might do that thing where our mind is less engaged of thinking them as a person, and so forth. So by getting in line with their way of getting wealth, then we'll switch that around, where that'll feel normal to us. Okay, love, and this is also can be like when I say love, that's a catch-all for like a feeling of social connection, romantic love is more important or less important to various people, right? By default, it's generally a pretty important thing to people. But at least this is a quick way to start. Even if you're meeting with a client, it still can be a relevant question for getting a feeling of their situation. And you might not know, but at least if you ask the question, this helps for you to drop your assumption and perspective. But this colors a lot more of your kind of feeling about different situations than you realize, or maybe you realize it, but than a lot of people might realize. For example, if you are married, and also this relates to having kids or not, right? But whether someone's married or whether someone's like in a situation very much like marriage, where they feel very secure with the person they're with, then that's one thing. If they don't feel that way, then someone will feel a lot more like life is like high school, where they'll notice whether like someone's gender, and it'll feel it a lot more, and they'll feel more competition generally with people of their own gender, right? And they'll feel a little bit more like people that are not their same gender are have something to offer in terms of approval when it comes to this whole thing and validation and so forth. So it's like an additional way that person's kind of like a gatekeeper or a potential source of value if they're a member of the gender that person's attracted to. And again, a little bit more of a sense of competition with people of the same gender. And that tends to matter. Of course, this varies from individual to individual, but what I'm pointing out, what I'm trying to get you is to open yourself up and ask questions, and then you're still going to feel it. You see, if you are single, but then you are going to be meeting with someone who's happily and stably married, and just because they're married, they might not feel that way. They might still feel like a high school mentality if they're married, but it doesn't make them feel like stable and kind of be done with that. But if the other person's married, you can imagine being married. If you're trying to imagine what they think about a certain, ultimately we want to ask questions of ourself, but after we're getting in the other person's mind, right? We want to get in someone else's mind, and then we're going to want to generally ask questions to ourselves, but to the other person's mind that we're getting into, such as how to sell them or whether they feel jealous or what to say to someone so they won't feel jealous, that sort of thing. Or just what might make them happy, what gift they might want, that sort of thing. And it doesn't have to be we ask them a question. We could just be getting in the other person's mind, and then we ask a question as the other person being in their mind, right? And then we feel the answer. So the wealth and then the love is a social thing. If you are more introverted and you're going to be meeting with someone that seems like they have a lot of connections and they spend time going out, then imagine that. Imagine you as a person doing that. And you not as a person like removed from you, but imagine yourself doing that and imagine liking it. Imagine that you can imagine, okay, you can, and I'm going to tell you about triangulating. An example, though, quickly, is like you could self-talk. You could just say, oh, cool, I'm going to go out with a number of friends tonight, and it's going to be cool, right? For me, I don't do that a lot, and like for me, David, and so I wouldn't just naturally have that perspective. If I need to get in the mind of someone that does have that'll really help me. Even if some of these things seem to have nothing to do with like the questions I'm going to ask myself as this other person, it still really matters for getting oriented to getting inside of their head. And all this can take seconds, right? It takes a while to do. I want to describe it so it's clear, but it could take seconds to do, right? It could just be as simple as thinking of myself as single, and having some reference points to that. Imagining myself, back in college or even my 20s, and remembering what it's like dealing with both women and men when that's the case. And it might not be the exact same for the other person, but at least it starts to loosen you up and get you there. None of this is to get cocky, right? None of what I'm saying is for you to get overly confident that you got it exactly nailed. And yet at the same time, this will really make a difference. So I can do that, and then I could say to myself, oh, I'm going out later with a bunch of friends, and I imagine where I might go, and I imagine liking it, right, and looking forward to it and liking it and that sort of thing, or thinking what I'm hoping to have happen when I go out, right, that sort of thing, as when I'm imagining, if I'm talking to someone, dealing with someone that's going to have that situation. And I said maybe health and energy. Health doesn't really come into play very much unless it's an aberration, right? Unless someone's basically unhealthy, or unless they're really into health. So if you're dealing with someone that's really into health, or they have a health issue, then you might need to note that and to think about what that might, like to imagine yourself going to the, if you're not someone that goes to the gym regularly, imagine you do and you look forward to it and you like it. You sometimes look in the mirror because you like to see the feedback, not because you have any problem. Like imagine looking in the mirror, flexing or posing, and it being, and if you're not in their head, you can feel yourself like your normal self, like you know who you normally are, and thinking that it's kind of weird doing that. You're not in the other person's mind unless you can imagine doing that and feeling like it's not weird because it just makes sense. Like if you go to the gym for an hour and you're working on sculpting your triceps, it makes perfect sense to look in the mirror at your triceps and see how that's going, right? And notice how you would notice other people's bodies more, right? And you would sort the people into like the workout or don't. I myself, me, normal David, I don't really notice that when unless it really stands out. I don't really look at other people and think about whether they work out and what their health situation is. If I was really into it, and now you can notice that it wouldn't just be health, could be fashion, right? Could be some other things that some people really notice. And sometimes it's not that people notice it overall, but if they're in church, then they might notice what people are wearing, perhaps, or if there are certain situations, they might notice what people are wearing. So this could be situational. But things but especially with health, there's the well-known thing that like in terms of sales, like information products, there's like health, wealth, and love is the main things that people are looking at for self-improvement, right? When it comes to taking on people's vectors, health isn't really going to be so much of an issue unless it is, right? So you can do a check on that. And then energy level can be relevant, particularly if you're thinking about something that you're committing to. That I've mentioned this before, right? But if you're drinking coffee and you're high energy, or if you just like feel high energy for some other reason, you just had a success, you've done a bunch of work, and you're feeling energized because you got a lot of things done, right? You know, we actually feel like a burst of energy if we accomplish things. Then be aware, like think, is this the energy state that I'm gonna, that I want to count on having in a few days? And maybe it is, and maybe that's good. But just you can think about it. So you can imagine the energy state that the person is likely to be in. When in the situation that you're wondering about them, where you're asking questions. So you can check on this. It might be relevant. It might not. If you leave it out, it probably isn't going to be a big deal. But you can glance at it, and it'll might jump out at you if it's going to matter. But immersing yourself in the wealth and love thing are going to do incredible wonders for you. And all of a sudden, it's going to be shocking. And you can notice that probably when you've tried to think what other people are thinking in the past, you probably haven't really done that to a significant degree. Good. All right. Second, 2B, self-image norms and what qualifies to validate, and currently what they're identified with. I'll explain. ID just means what they're identifying with. What I mean by what they're identifying with, or what they're going to be identifying with, or you could think of the different ways they identify, and you could try to bring out that identity, right? So a person that you're meeting with as a potential client could identify with being a business person. They can identify with someone who wants more business sometimes. Other times they might identify with someone that is satisfied, with their business. And you'd want to have, think about which identity, or just someone that's trying to fulfill on their stuff. And think how that could matter, right? Someone who's immersed in trying to fulfill and feels like kind of satisfied with the amount of clients they have right now. When I say clients, like business, but then other times they might not feel satisfied, then you can realize that, that's something I want to pay attention to and try to draw that out, the right identity out of them that's going to help me get to where I'm trying to get to. If someone's a waitress, right, then they're going to you need to take that into account, because if you're a guy, it's going to feel like they're more interested in you than they would be when they're identified differently. Right, when they're off work and you run into them, they're probably not going to treat you the same way that they treat you when they're a waitress. your spouse can identify as a parent, and while they're identifying like particularly as a dad or a mom, then they might identify a lot less as like a lover, right? And you want to be aware of that. And since they can wear these different hats, then you can, as this might be relevant for the reason that you're getting in their mind, you can, they could also identify as a friend of people like socially. They could identify as a person with a career, like a career person, right? Like your spouse or anyone. The client that you're meeting with can identify as a dad. They can identify as a spouse, you know. You can notice the kind of the major identities that person might have, and that can help you get immersed in their thing. And it can also differentiate. And as I indicated, it can help you think about which identity is better to bring out, right? How do you bring out the different identities? But kind of aligning with all of them is reasonable, right? You can ask about their kids briefly. But if you meet with them and they're particularly identified as a business person and they're thinking about making money and you ask them about their kids, that actually could backfire, right? Why would you want to bring that identity out? Unless their kids might be the reason why they want to grow their business, in which case it would be helpful, right? So just things to consider. And by considering those things, you're getting more in their mind, you see. So there's a method to the madness there. Okay, self-image norms and what it qualifies to validate. Here's an interesting thing. Some women, what they want validated is their intelligence. And this is relevant to me. I'm just giving you like an example anecdote. So here's what's interesting is that, so we want our self-image validated, right? Such as, we're just imagine this archetypical example because we have to picture something. Imagine a woman who wants to feel validated for her intelligence. Well, if that's the case, then with anyone that everyone wants to feel validated, their self-image validated. But what's interesting is you can't notice flattery, right? Backfires. Or a woman might want to think of herself as physically attractive, but from plenty of guys, indications that she's physically attractive she won't like. Or maybe in one sense she'll like them, not respond that well, but in another sense still might feel weird. You can imagine a woman walking past, like, let's say there's a construction site that's ongoing, or just she walks down a road and often gets a few beeps or honks or whistles. Then in one sense she might not value those too much, but in the other sense if they were missing one day she might wonder what's wrong with her that day. So people can be complicated. But we can clearly imagine someone who wants to be validated even for their attractiveness, physical attractiveness, but certain people don't validate them. Or if a woman wants to be validated for her intelligence, then what's interesting is that only certain people qualify, and different people can give a person a different number of points. So to that woman, let's call the woman Sally, right? So Sally wants to be validated for her intelligence. Well, different men, depending on Sally's kind of rating of those men, but not overall rating, but sort of rating in terms of how licensed they are to give her validation for intelligence. Basically how smart she judges those guys to be. So interestingly enough, a woman who feels like she wants to be validated for intelligence, she'll actually feel attracted to men based on their intelligence. She'll feel like she's attracted to their intelligence, but which is actually one of the things that's really attracting her is that they can validate her for being intelligent potentially. Even if they don't, that might even give them more ability to validate her eventually. If they don't immediately validate her for intelligence, then she might want it more, right? So people are interestingly complex in this way. But we tend, with a guy, generally guys want to feel validated, especially when they're single and don't have a woman really fulfilling this, like one woman really fulfilling this well for them. Then they'll want to feel validated, but it varies greatly how many validation points a woman is able to give them based on that guy's perspective. So just stereotypically for a lot of guys, and I'm not saying I'm an exception, or when I was dating, that was an exception here. Like the hotter I feel like they are, right, the more validation it would feel for me if they made it clear that they were attracted to me, right? Someone that I judged to be less attractive would less be able to validate me. And so it's really, interestingly enough, we're particularly attracted to people that that can validate our self-image. And then if someone wanted to read my mind or get inside of my mind when I was in that situation, especially being single, then they would have to feel that. And the thing is, this is skipping a bit to number 4, but when you're getting in someone's, trying to get in someone's mind properly, you can notice if you're doing it, if it's working, if you're doing it right, or if you need to work at it. Because if you're thinking about how things would feel to the person and you're feeling like that's disgusting or that's wrong or it's just irrelevant, then you're not in their mind. You are taking your baggage in, and you're not going to get proper answers when you ask questions of yourself in that other person's head that you're going to want. You see, you have to get to, and this is one of the deep, dope things that great things that are important points of this talk. And one of my aha moments as I was figuring out how to explain this to you, I was like, wow. And that was when I got excited and posted the post, like it is, going to be a good webinar, is what I'm telling you now is very important. And it might be a particular aha moment. This is number 4 here, and I'm not going to skip over the other stuff, but I'm just got to it kind of naturally. So I'll refer to it. When you imagine these major things about a person and what they're thinking, their self-image, norms, and validation, like cultural norms and how those feel right and normal, right, to the person. Not eating meat might feel, or certain types of meat or beef might feel normal to like a Hindu or something, right? Then if you're imagining that, or if you're imagining, in some cultures, women act more quiet, right, and have to us in the West, that feels like it's not right. But if I'm trying to get in the mind of someone where that's normal, then I haven't gotten in their mind until it feels okay. You see, this isn't really a danger. You need to, to get in other people's minds, you need to get over the idea that you can't even think something or that's against like your culture, or even something immoral, right? Like there's things I calculate, like with infringing on somebody's individual property rights, that I understand that's wrong, but I still sometimes might need, and even to help move the person where they change their mind about that sort of thing, you have to get to where you can feel like that makes sense and that it's normal and valid to infringe on someone's property rights, right, before you can figure out how to get them out of it. You see, so you have to become comfortable with feeling like certain things that you might otherwise think are wrong are okay while you're in someone else's mind. There's no moral danger to that. It's morally better to be able to be mentally flexible. And, right, you don't have to ultimately invade someone's property rights, right, just because you're feeling like part of what you'll do is see the contradiction as you're doing it, but then you can let go. Like, people's minds can hold contradictory beliefs in their head, no problem. People do all the time. You and I have and I've worked through myself zillions of contradictions in my mind, and I'm sure there's more to go. So it's going to really be a block for you that's not helpful if you can't imagine things like that. And in a culture where women or men have roles that don't seem like right to you, then also notice that unless there's property rights are being violated, then it's not necessarily wrong if it's voluntary. But if we parse it out, maybe there could be some things wrong with it, absolutely. But the bottom line is that like if people were being judged, their reputation was being hurt, they were treated as a lesser person for acting outside of that cultural norm, then that would be a problem. Certainly, I wouldn't approve of that aspect of a culture if it kind of threatened anything, including moral judgment towards a person who was, for example, be a woman and act how she wants, get a career or act equal to men. Then certainly that shouldn't carry any negative repercussions. But you can narrow down and you can get in the mindset of someone and feel like it's okay temporarily, and that is better to be able to do. Trust me. It's not going to be a danger. It's pretty obvious, right? You probably already agree with me. And then when you try it, you can see how you can do that without putting yourself in moral danger or worrying about like polluting your psyche, where all of a sudden you're going to start oppressing women or whatever. It's just not going to be a problem. So you want to get a sense of what might feel normal to them regarding how people dress, how what shows respect. And just like basically you can imagine what sort of things would make them feel good about their self-image. People want to feel like they make a good decision, right? So when you're meeting with a client, you might, when you're coming into the meeting or without doing this mind reading properly, you might think, okay, everyone wants more traffic. But no, everyone, or even more, at least more leads, or what they want the phone to ring more. But a lot of people might not be feeling they want the phone to ring more. They might be feeling there's various SEO services out there, and I want to feel like I made a smart decision on who I got to do my SEO work. And that might be the main thing that's motivating them, is they want to feel like they're making the right decision. And so then instead of talking about all the money they can make with their phone ringing, you might refer to that. It might be relevant. But really the subtext of what you're saying, if it was going to be relevant for the person you're talking to, and you could be aware of different possibilities, so you could be sensitive to it once you start talking to the person. But you could realize that one of the main types of people, or one of the main things that you can run into when you're in a client discussion, either in person or on the phone, is that they want to feel like they're making a smart decision. And you need to speak to that. And a lot of it you can't speak to. You can't just say, like, you're going to make a smart decision. You have to give off communications that validate that, right? You have to qualify to validate that they're making a smart decision, right? Just like if I want to, if a woman to feel good about herself needs a guy that's really ripped, then I'm not going to qualify to give her those feelings of validation. If a woman wants to feel intelligent, then in many cases that's going to be great for me, because if they want to be validated for intelligence, then they're going to feel like I'm a person that can give them a lot of points, right? And in a lot of cases, I'm not saying I'm pure intelligent to everyone, but it's just reasonably obvious that I come across as pretty intelligent to some degree, some number of people. Obviously, you have to know your strengths and weaknesses, and that's pretty clearly a strength of mine. And so I could be aware of that, and that could be relevant. Plus, just, again, getting in someone's mind, you really have to get a sense of, if you don't get a sense of what might validate their self-image, then, and if you're trying to think if a girl feels jealous, or if you're dating someone you don't want them to feel jealous, or if you want to check on whether you're doing things that make them feel jealous, then you imagine and you imagine what things are going to validate them, like what they want to be validated for, and then who they're going to want that validation to come from, what's going to sound like honest, feedback that will scratch that validation itch. And that's a very important part of what drives people. Okay, and then don't miss big contextual issues. They just had a child, right? What gifts a guy used this as an example of when they screwed up their mind reading is they thought of a gift they can give to their wife, and then they overlooked that it was like a kind of tickets to an experience, like a hands-on animal training experience or something like that. But then their wife had just given birth to a child or something, and she was exhausted and didn't want another thing to do. whereas previously she might have loved it. But so don't overlook major things in their environment. That could be an overall major thing, like a new relationship that the person got into, or a breakup that they got into, or a shake-up with their business situation, or a good thing that happened. Of course, an illness or an illness with a family member could be relevant depending on the person. So there's major contextual things. Just look for that. And when you look for it, it's not that you want to intellectually take into account or not. What you do is you feel like it happened to you. So you're immersing yourself in being the other person. So you're like, ooh, my mother just got sick. And now you might not know what that would do for the other person, but at least you can at least say that. And you might not know how important that is to the other person. What I mean is just like for myself, I totally love my mom, and I would pray a lot and do whatever if she was sick, but it wouldn't really affect like my day-to-day stuff all that much. And if I had important business stuff that my team was counting on, I wouldn't cancel it and go visit my mother. Other people would, and I can't tell you what's better. I'm not in any way saying my way is better whatsoever. I understand it could be worse, but that's just the reality for me. It could change also. Maybe, and a major change could be maybe I hit an income number that I'm comfortable with. However, if people are counting on me in business, then for me that still really matters, right? Or if my wife is counting on me in dealing with our son, then certain commitments like that could prevent me. If I had none of those going on, then I very well might travel out. If I did, then I might take precedence. For other people, their priorities would be different, right? I also grew up in a culture where family was not that big of a deal. Other people grow up in cultures where family is huge and obligations to family is a big deal. Taking care of your parents and all that is big to people's self-image and their norms, right? All of that can be very valid. I'm not trying to in any way make a judgment about that particular thing, but to get in someone's head, if that's going on, right, it might not be relevant if you're dealing with a client to wonder what would happen if their mother was sick, if that's not going on. But if it's going on, you can also at least stop and think about different ways that people deal with the situation, and that'll open you up, and you can kind of quickly get a sense. If they say, oh, my mom just got sick, and you could say, I don't know, but at least you could. You might get a sense of whether that's going to mean traveling, but you want to maybe say that in a way where you're not implying that they should be traveling, or not. And then, so the major events, and take on that those are happening to you, but you might not know how the person would react to them, but at least notice them. But along with the other stuff, you might guess pretty well how those major events would impact. Doing those first two, A and B, are going to make it more helpful to get a sense with C, and then you could use your common sense at least. And then with immediate, so I say major, but then immediate stuff, even if it's not major, it feels major, right? Just what's going on that day. Do they feel pretty busy? Do they feel pretty energized? Do they feel self-confident? Do they not feel so self-confident? Do they feel like they have money to spend or they don't have money to spend? You can just get a sense of it. Okay, nearly done here actually time-wise. Let's see, number 3. This is still useful. This is still good, but it's kind of easy to explain. Triangulate in with physical immersion plus self-talk narration. Okay, physically, and you might even switch to 2 and 3 if you want. I might do 3 first before 2. You can imagine physically that you're like them. They might be the same gender, but they might be taller, they might be shorter, they might be older, younger. If they're almost the same as you, you can still imagine just looking like them. It'll just help you focus. It might not make any difference, right? If someone is basically similar to, like relatively similar, just looks a little bit different, or even if they're a different gender, it may or may not matter to imagine myself physically as a woman, but by doing so, it'll help me focus and help me get into things. So I will do that. If I'm trying to imagine how women react, I would imagine physically being a woman, including the physical differences, right, of a woman and man. And the cool thing is, if you imagine, this would be kind of funny, but it'll help to illustrate how to do this, how to do all these things right and wrong. suppose I imagine I'm a woman and then I imagine myself having breasts. Well, in LA Story, Steve Martin said something really funny. He said, he said, um, he said something like, I'm glad I don't have breasts. If I had breasts, I would just like sit and play. I would never leave the house. I would just like sit and play with them all day. Right? It's kind of and of course it's funny for that reason, right? Because he's like taking his own context and then changing one thing and not changing enough of the other things. Mostly, of course, if you're a woman, then breasts don't seem a lot more normal to you and less interesting. And that might vary from woman to woman, but generally less interesting than they do to a guy. So what you could do is both imagine yourself having breasts and imagine them not being that much on your mind and being much of an issue, unless for some specific reasons, and they were. And you can imagine looking at another woman dressed provocatively, and you can notice the difference. If you're a woman, how that might make you feel versus if you're a man. Also, if you're a woman with a guy that she's interested in or her husband around, and how that might matter versus if that's not the case. Or if you're a woman in a working environment, and in that way it's kind of maybe competitive, and you see a woman dressed provocatively, how you would feel versus it being a man. Those type of things help get you out of your own mindset and into the other mindset. And remember that it should feel normal. You don't want to just imagine a caricature. When you imagine a caricature, like if you're a woman and you imagine being a guy, and then so you're a woman doing this exercise, right? You're listening right now, you're a woman. And you're imagining being a guy in a work environment, and you're imagining another woman being there dressed provocatively. You don't just want to imagine a caricature of a guy and judge that. If you imagine, if I was a guy, I'd be like, oh, wow, and it would just influence me, and I wouldn't be able to think, and so on. Well, then you're not getting in their head, right? You're just projecting. If you're getting in their head, you might feel, guys can feel differently, but they might feel just like they want the woman. They might feel like it might be taking over their focus, and they might be thinking about how to nudge out other guys or even get the woman to approve of them. But they also might be judging it and thinking, why is she dressed that way? I myself, at this point in my life, I would mostly be looking to just stay focused on the objective one way or the other, not judge it, not let it make me look down on the person, not make me treat them as more. If the person genuinely somehow convinced me that they found me attractive, then that would be like nifty, right? That would be like neat, cool. Someone found me attractive. But anyway, just watch out for a caricature. However it is, it should feel valid. Right? And if I'm trying to get in if I'm a guy trying to get in other guys' minds, I might not know how that situation might make them feel, but whatever it is, I want to feel like it's valid no matter what, right? If you feel like a certain perspective is invalid, if you're kind of being judgmental, then that really doesn't go along with getting in someone else's mind. That's kind of the lesson there. All right, so triangulate in with physical immersion. That's a real hack. It's a real trick that works really well. Okay, so imagine physically being like them, and you could a little bit imagine maybe their energy level, if that's relevant, if it's significantly different than yours, upper or lower, more or less. And then self-talk narration, like you can say stuff like I said, I'll be going out later, or if you're imagining yourself as a client that you'll be talking to, you can imagine saying, there's probably different people offering SEO services, but I want to make sure I make a good decision. Just say that. So you, as the person, like the OMGer, right, listening right now, who might want to meet with on the phone or in person with a client, but you're imagining getting another client, you're trying to do this exercise, get in their mind, then you would use the self-talk as the client. You're not trying to guess what the other person is saying to themselves in their head. What you're doing instead is you're saying things in your head that affirm the stuff from number 2, or the physical immersion. All right. So you could say, "Oh, I have breasts," right? But that's normal. You could say, like I said, like about the SEO thing. Imagine you're a parent and you're talking to a teenager, and they are having an issue with a peer, right? And if you let's suppose that you, as the parent, say, oh, what that, and let's say the peer's, let's just use Sally. Let's suppose the peer's name is Sally, not your daughter or son, but the peer. If you say, oh, what Sally doesn't matter, what Sally said doesn't matter, that's not mind reading, right? That's actually will distance you guys a little bit, right? Because you're reflecting. They feel like it does matter, and so if you're trying to get in the mind of your teenage child, then you need to feel like these like fairly obvious things in their environment or things they're indicating to you are valid. You're not in the other person's mind unless the things that they would affirm feel valid. So unless you feel like Sally's opinion really does matter to some degree, maybe you feel like you'd rather Sally's opinion didn't matter to you as your teenager, but it does right now. Then unless you feel like Sally's opinion matters and that's valid, then you haven't gotten into the other person. So that's number 4. But for number 3, you might just say, like, oh, I wish Sally just liked me better, or would treat me better, or would treat me with more respect. You see, that self-talk will help you get in your teenage son or daughter's mind, right? Saying that to yourself as part of this exercise. You imagine physically being like your son or daughter. You imagine like the A, B, and C things up here, and then you imagine that what Sally might have said or did to you recently, immediate big event, and then you say like, oh, like I wish she would treat me better, or I wish she liked me, right? Or I wish she didn't treat me with respect. I wish she didn't say these things about me to other people. You see, so you affirm realities, like a reality. So you do self-talk narration. Of narrating a little bit about the reality of the situation. That's different than trying to copy what the person's actual self-talk might be. Okay, but that narration would help you. Just like the person whose mind you're trying to get into, the potential client, they don't like stop and necessarily think about their physical body being what it is. But because you're trying to make the transfer into their mind, you should stop. You stop and you imagine your physical body being like the person you're trying to get, the client or the teenager. You're not copying what they do, right? Your teenager or the client, they before the meeting or that day, they don't necessarily think about that they have their body. They just have it. Once in a while they might, but mostly they might not, right? A teenager might be aware of their body, but they still don't like orient themselves to the fact that they have their body. Number 3 isn't an attempt to copy the other person. It's an attempt to bridge yourself over. So you're not supposing that the other person does this exercise. In this case, you are kind of more like copying, right, and kind of trying to copy their context around you and in your head. With this, you're helping to bridge and that's why, again, I might do this first. You can reverse the order. Number 3. Imagine being physically them and then narrate the main things about their situation. And again, they wouldn't do that narration themselves, but you're doing it because it helps get you over. Okay, and then the kicker here is number 4, is you need to check, and this is where I've been talking about the validity. It needs to feel valid. It needs to feel, you need to feel like a smart and kind of right person inside of their worldview. Even, as I put here just as an indication, even if a person feels depressed or they feel like, damn, I'm so stupid, right? And you're trying to get in their head, they still feel kind of right that they're saying how they were stupid, right? You know what I'm saying? Like it feels like valid and kind of more like they're supposed to like feel depressed, or that they're smart for kind of feeling depressed in a sense. People do feel conflicted, and if you notice conflicts in someone's mind, okay, that might be correct. People can feel conflicted about things. You can feel kind of both sides of the conflict. But on some level, you need to feel like what you're imagining as being that person, and their norms, their culture, their standards, that dressing a certain way is better, that wearing a suit is what someone should do when they're working, right? That needs to feel valid to you, or else you haven't gotten over into their mind. Once it does feel valid, these things, then you're pretty golden. You can start asking yourself questions. Similarly, if you're trying to imagine yourself being very successful, having a successful business that you're trying to make, several years down the road or whatever, then when you imagine being that person, you can still do all these things. And once you do it a bit, you can hop into it fast, right? The more you do this, the more easy it is to do for the same person, of course, but even for other people, it's quicker and easier to do. It can get very quick and easy and even intuitive. Even intuitively, you may stop using associative things to figure out how someone feels and instead do this. I believe it's the case that I intuitively do this to a pretty large degree with people, not like perfectly and so forth, and I still like to check for sure. I never have a goal to like be right without checking, right, and without using method, but this becomes more intuitive just so you can understand that. So if it ever feels like a bunch of work, it really isn't. It's way less work to go through life this way, trust me. It makes life very easy. Relative to your situation, it makes life easy. I'm not saying life is or isn't easy overall, but it can be much easier when you do stuff like this. And all the alchemy stuff is geared toward making your life significantly easier. I feel like I was saying something, so I was tying this together. Needs to feel valid now? Okay, that's good for now. All right, excellent. Glad I like these kind of, when things end up being structured, I kind of enjoy it for that reason. But excellent. Okay, we can talk for a little bit. It's a little late, but I'll at least check on things. I'll maybe skip to the end here and then go from there. James Wright, let me take a drink here. James writes, getting in the mind of people and feeling okay with their norms is just what Poirot or Holmes would do, right, David? It doesn't mean Poirot and Holmes take on those norms, become murderers themselves. Right, but doing it is so important and feeling the truth. That's beautiful. That's excellent, James. And you're welcome, Elizabeth, for saying thanks, David. Rick writes, David, that is so key. Validating the decision they need or want to make. Scratch the validation itch. Yeah, separately from getting in people's minds, or part of why you want to get in someone's mind is the fascinating truth about people is that certainly they want to be validated. Remember, for you, you can make yourself a lot less influenceable in the wrong way by, you can appreciate validation and enjoy it, but if your self-image is based on you using method, then you're a lot less susceptible to kind of like too much manipulation, and you're kind of you gotta have a strength at the base of your self-image that way, and then you can appreciate and enjoy validation, but not in a way that's gonna kind of backfire on you. What was I going to say there? Oh, but it really helped. Like the idea that it's not just that people want to hear certain things, but that they want to hear it from people that they judge to be worthy of validating them, right? And that even it's not even worthy or not, but it's how worthy. Then it's pretty insight. That's a pretty major part of dealing with people. Is dealing with that. Sebastian writes, wow, there's no moral danger to identifying with immoral attitudes. It's morally better to be mentally flexible, such a game changer. Oh, that's wonderful, yeah, because it can be a real block for people, right? I think people can have a block when they're dating. You really, to imagine the person that you might be dating, in a sense, you need to imagine them wanting to be, being attracted to you, right? So any kind of issue with, like if you're a guy, any issue with being attracted to men, which I think for other reasons you shouldn't have as well. I'm not saying you should be attracted to men, but that you shouldn't have any kind of disgust or moral issue with it. But it'll also block you from getting in the mind of a woman, right? Because you want to feel like you're them being attracted to you and see where that goes. So number 2 and 3 is like taking a reflective perspective, reflective listening. Let me think here. Let me think. And I might, one of the things I do, if you notice, is I sometimes say to people, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. It might be correct, you see. So I combine this with kind of humility. I don't just presume that what occurs to me when I read what someone writes is what they meant, right? So I cover that kind of prior to that list, right? That formula. I cover just basically being humble will get you a long way. At least keep you from just having the wrong answers and being overconfident. But you still have to kind of guess too much and successfully approximate a little too much if all you are is humble. So that the formula lets you hone in better and be precise. Number two is like taking a reflective perspective. Let's see. So let's imagine I'm sitting here. I'm not with the other person. That you could do this while you're with somebody. You are getting outside of your normal like thinking about yourself, like as yourself. One of the things that really helps with this is, remember, you can, and with number one also on this list, is you can I don't think I said this. You can reorient yourself to the fact that okay, you have a consciousness field and you're the being that's aware of that consciousness field. You aren't yourself. And normally you'll identify with yourself a lot, like your kind of body, mind, and all that stuff. Like normally what you think of as yourself. And that's valid to do, but getting outside of like identifying with yourself reasonably often and in different ways, both by identifying with other people. Oh, just someone who reads like fiction books, that they'll be better at getting other people's minds. They'll be more empathetic, like kind of usefully empathetic with other people, right? Because when you're reading a book, you're getting in someone else's mind. I think I must have said everything about that I meant to say. I was done, but I didn't have the feeling of being done, but I was done. So it's reflective in a sense that you're not identifying with yourself. But the more you can not identify with you don't identifying with yourself is totally correct while you're doing tasks and plenty of the time. But again, the more it becomes not so much all the time, the better. The more it doesn't feel like the exception, that it's kind of weird, and the better. Oh, what do actors do? They say, "What's my motivation?" Right? You see, let me see if I'm able to develop this. My mind's a little bit. I'm a little bit reaching the end of my creative focus here, but when someone, in a normal circumstance, when someone tries to read someone else's mind, they carry their own motivations in, and then they just insert themselves into the situation, like I said with Walmart. Like a journalist who's infiltrating Walmart and writing about it, their motivation might be to impress their peers and feel like prideful about how they make money. Plenty of people don't need to feel like status pride about how they're making money, which frees them up to just like they feel their sense of pride from family and just their social group, and then if there are people their social group also either they or just that they're married to someone that takes care of it, and then they just enjoy going and working at Walmart or wherever. So you have to look at their motivation, right? That's kind of inherent within the stuff I talked about. But, Rick wrote, reflective as in taking on the other person's perspective. Just be really careful about what you mean by taking on the other person's perspective. You really need to immerse yourself in not just their lens, but like what they're standing on, their context, where they came from, where they're coming from, right? That's what especially that first line is about. Oh, both A and B are really about getting the other person's like kind of foundation. Not necessarily their foundation from infancy, but their cultural foundation, and then their major things that are foundational for their sense of who they are. So I would just be careful what you mean by taking on their perspective. You're really taking on more like their foundation and their total context. Normally when people try to take on people's perspective, they do ineffective mind reading when it's measured in experiments. And that could even be worse than not trying to do that. For example, if Israelis or Palestinians try to take on the perspective of the other group, they'll easily just think, well, if I was a crazy barbarian psychopath or whatever, then I would do such and such. So it doesn't really help them. Like they just figure that's the other person's life. They take on that perspective, right? Or if we take on the perspective of someone that we think of as particularly wrong, that big check, the big validation check, at least will keep you from doing this wrong, most likely, is make sure that you feel like the other person's, like you feel like the perspective you're taking on is morally kind of like fully valid. If you can't feel that way within at least a little bubble, then you're not doing it. Michael Longword, I've used parts of this for years, but really this number 4 is all new for me. Yeah, exactly, that valid thing. That was my big breakthrough that got me to be excited about this this webinar. I do that, but I realize to explain that I do it. That's some of alchemy, some stuff I'm trying to figure out better for myself, and then I'm in the midst of doing that, and I try to explain to you what I know. And in that way, I break throughs. With this, it's probably a strength of mine. It's still helpful to figure out more about it, but that number 4 is something I've been doing, but I wouldn't have realized to explain to people until I did realize. And I didn't realize to explain it to Mike either until now. Michael wrote, thanks, David. Irene, thanks, David. Great. Yeah, we're kind of, I guess, wrapping up a little bit. Let's see what else here. Elizabeth said, I was trying to get into Michael Long's mind today when I was writing subject lines for emails. He's so good at it and talented, not like me. That's great. Nice. What would Michael do when writing subject lines? Mike, you want to tell people where the subject line skill came from? You could try to get into probably for the subject line. Mike writes the actual emails, and he's amazing, and I don't have that talent at all. For subject lines, it's something I work with Mike on, and I did for a while. Yeah, yeah. The number one thing is like clarity, and then event. If you think in terms of clarity and then like an exciting, referring to some event, Elizabeth, then that's going to help you. You basically want an email to be about an event and in some way. I did a whole few videos on that in my course about info business. But it's amazing. I'll have a talk with Mike and give him kind of a frame or seed idea, and what he'll do with that is extraordinary. He's been writing for so many years, and it's just exciting what he does with it. Faith writes that feeling that other people's ways and behavior are valid is so important. I've seen this from living in many countries and cultures. I have to feel that their way is valid, or it's a real block to understand that. Absolutely. It's amazing what opens up and how things seem so different when you understand their reasons for their behavior. And another reason why, again, the individual property rights idea serves as this like nice boundary that can open us up and let us feel like so many other things are potentially valid. And if something isn't valid, we can notice, okay, that's why, and then we can let go and not worry that we're going to start doing it. And then that'll also let us let go so we can take on the perspective, right? Part of it would help Sherlock Holmes take on the perspective of a murderer is that he's in no danger of that taking over. You feel like it if it's kind of a gray area you're worried about, right? Like with the homosexual issue, then, for example, just as an archetype, like some guys are probably scared that they have homosexual tendencies to some degree, and then they feel it's wrong, and so they're scared to take on the perspective because they feel like it'll mess them up. You see what I'm saying? And so, or if someone's worried about that they're sexist or racist, then they could be worried about taking on the perspective of a culture that might look like that on the surface or actually be. But once you can just realize it's about individual property rights and then separately about just caring about people, then you can kind of relax and not worry that you're going to become what you're picturing. And if you're too worried about it, you can address it and maybe there is an issue that you want to clarify, like a cluster for yourself. Sure, but you only understand that if you approach them with open curiosity rather than judgment. I catch myself being worse at doing this at home than when I travel. No, absolutely. That's a great point, Faith. When people appear to be like us, including if they appear to be like us by living in the same town as us, they can physically appear to be like us, but also if they're just in a group or they're in our church or they just live in our town. I see this. I see this in business. That's when the real misunderstandings can happen, right? It's kind of easy if someone talks with an accent and looks different and clearly was born somewhere else. It's a lot easier to think, wait a second, I might not be interpreting what this person's saying properly. But as a general rule in life, like when you feel most confident, that's a good time. It's easy to misinterpret what I'm saying, but if there's any sort of red flag, like if someone says something to me, if there's going to be something like negative in there, including that I think that means they don't want to do something that I'm hoping that they'll do. I'll try to take on that maybe I'm not sure what they're saying. If it's incredibly clear, that's one thing. But really watch it, and especially if you're starting to judge somebody else or feel negative or any issues with someone based on something they said, watch out, right? Give them, and I try to work this into my relationships when reasonable or as reasonable, where we have this kind of thing. Like if you think I say something that's a problem, just make sure. It might even be a misinterpretation. Sometimes people can just literally hear the wrong word. It's not even a misinterpretation of what they said, but it just sounded. I've had that happen to me, where they thought I said different words than I said, right? Having that space is so effective in relationships. So many people jump to conclusions and just get in these issues. They might not have a fight. They might just be passive aggressive about it, right? People just store it in their head, but then it wasn't even something real. And operating that way is a problem. And the more you don't operate that way and operate well, the more you encourage the people around you to operate where they don't jump to conclusions as much. And then that's better, better cycle. But that's great what Faith wrote. I catch myself being worse at doing this when I'm home than travel, where we jump to conclusions about people. Joseph wrote, "Thank you, David. Wow, an unexplainable peace in regarding my prospect meeting on Wednesday this week. More comfortable with the meeting experience in general. Alchemized." That's so wonderful, Joseph. I'm so glad. Francisco Wright, thanks, David Mills. Elizabeth, yeah, I just want it open. Well, the thing is, Elizabeth, with email subject lines, keep in mind, the people on your list, you're presuming, and you should presume in essence, that they want what you're selling, so to speak. I don't mean that you're even selling something, but like they want what you're talking about. They're interested in the topic. So clarity is good, and then have an event, like some kind of event. An event could be a communication event, could be a webinar, could be something coming up, could be a blog post, could be like an event in a simple way. But there's you're being clear about something of value to the people listening to you. You don't really need to be extra clever. Cleverness really, one thing I say is with email subject lines or headlines is really put clarity as a huge priority over cleverness. Trying to be clever, it's surprisingly unimportant when it comes to marketing. You can demonstrate competence by giving people a clever aha moment, but you don't really need to be clever with attention. You can have something unique about your event, or something you can be clear about your unique selling proposition, right? About something that's unique or a benefit to them that presumably they just can't get anywhere else, right? But just being clever for the sake of being clever, don't worry about it. You'll just run yourself in circles. Right, clarity and narrative, excellent. Right. Sean writes, "So David, just to see if I understand, can we visualize a person like a picture? The more pixels of information you have about them from 1, 2, and 3, the more precise is your resolution about the person's picture, which can help you." One thing I'd add to that, Sean, and great question, and not just great question, but greatly kind of phrased, kind of explained question, like a scenario and everything. Part of what you're not just trying to get more pixels filled in. You're also trying to not have the wrong pixels projected on the person, and actually prioritize that. If all you did was clear up all the projection on the person that was going to interfere, then at least when you're talking to them, you could, you would do that. And then if you had questions about all this, let's say you almost could answer, had very little idea about most of the things that I talked about in that formula about a particular person. In a lot of cases, you will have an idea, and that'll be helpful. But even if you didn't, at least you'd have questions that could help you fill in the pixels properly. But with a person that you know better, yeah, you can fill in the pixels, and then by doing this, it'll give you more questions, and you'll fill them even better after that. I have an amazing track record, by the way, at guessing whether my wife would want something brought home, either dessert or a meal for her to eat, and what she might like, just by thinking of the context and the situation. I did something really interesting when I was first meeting her, or pretty early on, within a month or two, or three, I think it was. But I think even within the first month of meeting her, I imagined correctly where she imagined, like I imagined her being her relating to me and like how, like thoughts that she might have. And I imagined her handing me, like, I imagined her imagining that she had a baby with me and was proudly showing it to me and feeling how she, and her using that also to feel how she felt, like kind of how that would make her feel and so forth. And then her feeling kind of a sense of pride about that. And that was kind of one of the ways she would judge whether it was the right guy. And that is so far from anything that I would picture, let me tell you. I mean, I've never been at a point in my life where I like wanted to be a father or wanted a child in a particular active way. It's just not much part of my thinking and that sort of thing. So it's totally out of the box for me. But she said that I was correct about that, and I was pretty amazed. Of course, a person can always be faking it, but she's not really the kind of person that fakes stuff like that or is deceptive about that. So that's an example. Another interesting example is when I first, a quick funny story. We were early on in our relationship. Well, it hardly matters. It was early on, but early on we were going and we were at a shoe store, and there was so many. From my perspective, there were just so many shoes. It was like all shoes, right? And she was looking at the shoes and looked at the shoes and looked at the shoes, and tried some on, and then she said, it must not be sorry. It must not be the season for shoes. This might not be as funny for you. I'm not saying you have to laugh, but just for me, it's still funny listening. She, in all seriousness, she said, it must not be the season for shoes. And so that what's interesting about that also in terms of the validity is that I could know that I'm not seeing the world from her perspective unless I could make a statement like that as her, like as imagining of her, and feel like that makes perfect sense, right? Because again, it was the kind of statement. It was so far out of my reality, like this idea that it must not be the season for shoes. But it actually, once she explained it, like there is a way that actually does make sense, or did make sense. But it just at the time I just found it hilarious. But then separately. I was trying to figure out, like, she would go and she would look at stores for clothing, and like for me, if I would go to a clothing store, it would be because it was like like a dire emergency, right, or something like I'm a little bit exaggerating for effect, but basically I needed some sorts of clothes, and like I wouldn't be like naked or anything, but like I would really need them. And I'd be pretty down to like very few of that particular thing, shorts or shirts or whatever, and it would be to get in and out, and I would just be trying to hit a pretty wide target, like pretty much as long as I didn't look totally ridiculous, it looked reasonable, then okay, or the person that I'm with or married to, if they like it, then that's plenty for me, unless I feel like I look totally ridiculous, which I wouldn't want to do either. I wouldn't want to feel like I look ridiculous. But it probably takes a lot for me to feel that way. But she would go and she would like look and feel like satisfied, like looking and so forth. Oh, and like even a sense of accomplishment from like going and looking and not getting anything. And like it would be but then I realized that like I imagined as her and that being kind of valid, and I realized it's like doing like reconnaissance, like for her. Like for me, I would feel like it was a real failure. Like if I went to a store for like half an hour or more and tried on things and didn't get anything, it would be like a real waste of time. But for her, it would be pretty fulfilling. And then I realized it's like reconnaissance, and then you actually feel like you make a better decision in the future, right? If you like look, try things on, don't always get something, then when you do, you like she would enjoy feeling like she made good purchases. And that the idea of like doing reconnaissance, and then I realized that I would actually do the same thing for like video games. Now with video games, I don't want to just feel like I made a good purchase. I mean, I would want something that would actually be fun for me is what I would look at. So it's a little bit different. But then generally a person that likes shopping, they wouldn't even characterize it as, oh, I want to feel like I made a good purchase. They would say, I want to actually make a good purchase. Right? One other quick little story, which is fascinating in real life from business perspective, but relates to the same thing about shopping, is J.C. Penney. They tried these everyday low prices, and it really flopped. And they really did. Like instead of having like 60% off or 40% off sales that are kind of a little ridiculous, they would just have like every day 20% off, or 15% off or 10% off. And it really didn't go over. And in a way that in a sense just didn't make a lot of sense. But I realized a perspective that makes real sense out of it is that with people shopping, and remember, everyone doesn't have to feel this way for a defective business bottom line, even if 20% of the population feels this way and the rest of them don't really shop the same regardless of how they price things, but 20 or 40% do different, then overall their sales would drop dramatically, right? So I realized that for some segment of the population, they feel like they want to go do something fun, but they also want to feel like they're accomplishing something, but they're like not working. Like again, let's just say you're married to someone that supports you, and so you like want to get out of the house, and ideally you want to like feel like you accomplished something, like you even like made money. Well, if you buy something that's always 20% off, then you feel like you got something, and let's say you pay like $50 for it, and the normal price is like maybe the retail, like the suggested retail is 60 and you pay 50 because they have that every day, and you can like rely on that. But you get no sense of accomplishment from that. You basically feel like the real price is 50 and you paid 50. But if you get something where you feel like it's 60% off, and instead of 60% off of 60 would be, I guess, $36 off, maybe $24, unless I did the math wrong. So $24 for something that's normally 60. Then you feel like you have maybe 60 or maybe like 50. You might round down a little. You might be like, okay, maybe it's like, it wouldn't really sell for 60, but it's like a 50, 50. You round out a little bit, but I got it for 6% off. I got the $50. Now that you walked home, you actually increased value. You actually like made money in your mind, right? Like in your feeling. Like, do you feel this? You came home and you like have $50 worth of stuff. And you looked around, you found something that you liked, right, that you felt like looks good on you, but it's for 20, you paid 24 and you have $50 worth of value. And so you do that all day long. You just shop and shop and shop, and you just keep on making money, right, in the sense of like more value. Like you basically feel like you have all this money's worth of clothing for money, and you didn't spend that much. And I guarantee you a lot of people, that is what's going on. That has to be it, that sense. And isn't that? And I read the fact about J.C. Penney and how it didn't go over well, and how they had to revert back to the typical model where everything's like 40 or at least 40, if not 6% off, to sell clothing. But it has to be that, right? It's so coherent. Oh, awesome! Congratulations, Kevin. Wrote Kangaroo Kelly here in Sydney, Australia. David, enjoying the Clarity, which has helped me close some deals recently. That's awesome. Spinning more plates with Clarity, 2 more clients to close this week, then off traveling on those 2 international client trips. It's wonderful. All right, I'll pretty much really wind it down here. Ha ha ha, Rick wrote, Mike, your emails are so good because you squeezed them fresh that day. And that's definitely a part of it, right? It really is great that Mike writes them fresh. They're not like canned autoresponder things, and that's real. Mike really does write them, that day. You could pose with that day's newspaper, Mike, in the email. Proof. Something, although I guess these days online you could fake that. You could do that, but then have the canned email with it. Mike wrote, something David taught me that is so powerful is that doing things by clarity plus narrative in your subject lines allows people to stay on your list even if they aren't opening emails and still pop right in and buy from you down the line. That's, oh, right, because if you're always giving them clickbait and it's not matching up, like it's kind of nice for them if they feel like they can just look at the subject line, get a sense of what's in there, even if they don't click, but they don't mind staying on your list. And then they'll also be able to spot if there is something they might want. And that's cool. This is a secret to why David's law of implication method, with David's law of implication method, your email list doesn't have to die like many gurus teach, right? But you're a big part of that too, Mike, with your energy and the way you just do these things, and then the energy that inspires the feedback and the results and the stuff that gives you building blocks to put in your emails. If you guys ever get a chance to work with Mike Long, I highly recommend it. Um, Deborah wrote, thank you, David. An actor does a lot of research and homework preparing for a part. Right, absolutely, right? They're doing the same type of thing, right? Aside from leaving one's own ego aside and getting into someone else's mind, I think you're also talking about taking the necessary time to do your homework to understand your particular client. Right, when that's plausible. Sometimes you can do research, and absolutely, that can be good. It can also demonstrate competence. Right, and as you do this, that'll open you up to realizing that and questions about that. And the other thing is it'll open you up with questions when you're talking to the person on the phone or in person, or a person this could be your spouse, right? And you can realize questions to ask them. As you get in their mind, you can realize you're not sure about a particular thing. You're trying to get into their experience. And it doesn't, again, none of this has to do with manipulating people necessarily. You might just be trying to figure out what makes them happy, right, or what's important to them, or what they just don't like, so you can stop doing it. And you can realize you don't know the answer to some things. Sometimes you can ask someone directly, but people don't always know their own minds. And sometimes some direct questions people don't want. But you can kind of poke around in different ways. Once you have a question, then you can often poke around in different ways to get the answer to it. So that's very right, Deborah. Great question and statement. Joseph Baffy writes, after following the 4 steps and coming to the conclusion that I do not really know clearly what is the mind of a person, but I am now open to seeing or feeling what is in their mind, I feel that I would still be much farther ahead. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And you'll start, and then Joseph wrote, will still be more receptive to the truth of who they are. Totally right. And it's surprising. There'll still be some things that you can know. Definitely, right. Some things you can't, but even just some of the big obvious things, right? Even just their gender, generally what their business might be, or that they're in business for themselves, that they might have a job, that they have employees. If a person has employees and you don't, you can imagine that. And just like you can imagine that you have, and you can ask yourself as the person some questions like, okay, I have employees, what does that mean? And with scenarios, using scenarios, you can find that you potentially have a lot more information about someone than you thought, right? If you just know they have employees, then you can develop that. You realize, I have to pay them each week or every 2 weeks. Whether or not like the money's in my account, I still need to pay them, right? You can imagine if someone is a good worker, how you want to keep them, and then you might think about how to motivate them more. You can imagine if someone's not a good employee and what that means and how you have to deal with that. And I don't know, just sometimes you poke around, and all these things can be very quick when it's in your own head. It takes a while to explain this stuff, but doing stuff like this in your head with scenarios can be pretty fast. Susanna wrote, very enlightening and interesting. Thank you. You're very welcome. You're welcome, Sean. Bryce wrote that he was in Mexico, noticed how the society was. People were very friendly to me, and yet many of them were trying to scam me, and there were drug gangs active at night in the city I was in. I feel that government's lack of action, the habits society's developed, and the lack of opportunity has led many people there to get into a state of scarcity. Yeah. There's an interesting article written by someone from Brazil talking about how their attitude towards others and people they don't know, and then family, and their attitude towards success, and how people should take care of them if they're in their family, and they're successful, they're expected to provide for other members of the family, and how that also relates to government. Government's really in a feedback loop with the culture, and it has so much to do with how people feel about individual property rights of the people with both strangers and even family, whether you feel entitled to stuff from people close to you and things. And so government is one place in the feedback loop, so is culture, but ultimately the way to change things is going to be spreading the right ideas to individuals. Anything else is kind of doomed to failure. Like it theoretically works, and I'm not saying you were saying this, it's just kind of sparked something for me. Like it theoretically works, say, government needs to do this, or people need, or this community of this race or that group of people need to do this. They need to take this more seriously. They need to police their own. Well, a group, as I said before, can't really do something. And an actual solution is going to involve something you as an individual can do to do, what other people as individuals can do. So I've concluded that's the way that can really work with change, and not anything else. And that's, of course, why I'm doing things the way that I am. many people's property rights, right. Property rights violations just feel so normal there. There's really no sense of individuals. Global, like I think globally by thinking about each individual, including people in other countries, but thinking globally in a way that diminishes the individual, or thinking nationalistically in a way that diminishes the individual, or thinking tribally in a way that diminishes the individual. Anything that diminishes an individual, their property rights, and their power, and their individual, and is going to be counterproductive. And so what they'll do is they'll sometimes characterize that as selfishness. But there's what's selfish is violating someone else's property, right? Like not respecting someone else's property. Sean writes, the chameleon mindset, being able to develop enough mental flexibility to understand the true fundamentals of people. Mind blown again. Correct. And whenever you want flexibility, the key, or one of the keys, big keys though, like a hidden key, is having strength somewhere at the foundation, right? Irene wrote, haha, I so totally understand your wife, David. That's great. Sorry, I couldn't ignore that while I was talking. But that's why the foundational stuff, grounding yourself in that you're a being that's aware of your consciousness field, grounding yourself in methods and things that you do know for sure, that we've developed, that built a number of those for you during Alchemy, and we'll build more. That strength in the right place that is genuinely understood and correct helps with flexibility in other places, similar to boundaries. Shema wrote, I had a very intense experience recently involved in a political discussion that got very heated. Looking back at it now, I know there is much I could learn from it, how I perceive people and their political stance, etc. My sense of desire to get a point across and feel heard. Right, absolutely. That helps me to point out to people, if you want people to understand you, then you've got to use that as a motivation to this whole process. Just like if you want to make money, use that as a motivation to do this process in order to meet with clients or however else you make money, but just as an example, right? But if you want people to understand you, however, politically or romantically or socially or for whatever reason, or because you want to spread alchemy ideas, you need to use that again as a motivation to first understand them. And they're not going to understand. I know this is like a kind of something off of a greeting card, but now you can really particularly see it and feel it. They're not going to understand you until you also model the deeper idea of understanding them first. And you're just not going to be able to navigate them to where you are unless you get a sense of where they're at. And you need to get a sense of how it feels valid. Like I can understand how being a police officer feels valid. I can understand that they ignore a certain contradiction, but our mind is easy at ignoring things like that, right? But there's all sorts of things people don't realize, right? Like take the minimum wage. It's easy. All you do is you can just affirm a certain statement. I understand how people think that evolution's valid. It's easy. You just keep something blurry to a certain degree, and then it looks like it makes sense, right? Right, with minimum wage, if you're just looking at it from the perspective of you're imagining you're a person, you need to support a family, and you can't do it, and you try to figure out what's the minimum you can do to support a family of like 4, then of course, and then if you feel like government is a source of goodness rather than that it's based fundamentally in violence, then and that's blurry, but you just feel like the government's going to do something, so it might as well do that. And then what is a family of 4? Then it makes perfect sense and it's very valid to want the minimum wage to be something. And at the same time, that same person could see, okay, look, I get that if it's $25 or $100, that's too much, but at least something, right? But that, again, that's why I try to boil things down simply. With all the complexity, you can come to all kinds of wrong things can seem right. You need to clear things up and see things simply, generally. You can add details after that, but fundamentally using violence on two people that are trying to have a transaction, right? An employee and an employer are just transacting business. A third party interfering with violence when it's voluntary for both people, there's no fraud, there's no property rights violation, and a third party is just interfering, then that's only going to interfere with commerce and then hurt people. It's that simple. Right? You don't need any further arguments. Anything else is just noise when it comes to minimum wage. Just as an example. Wondering how I could do that with your topic tonight, get your point across and heard, and in the future how I could have a similar conversation that could feel more productive. Help. Basically, the way to help somebody politically, and I've been successful with this both with religion and politics, pretty much the only technique I use is I'm trying to understand where they're coming from. If it's wrong, then I can only help them if I figure out the contradiction. So I have to spot that in my own head. I don't have to say it. And then I ask them questions that help them to clarify their own thinking. But people are usually, like, it depends. And if I get, like if they start to get pissed off, then I'll basically stop. But sometimes they like it and they're interested. And then you can lead them to, based on their own premise, you lead them to where they have to choose one thing or the other. You can see this on a much milder level if I'm helping somebody where they are trying to make money and there's a couple of things that they're thinking of trying to accomplish. And even if it's like one overall make money endeavor, like there's the obvious thing where people say focus on one make money endeavor. But even within one make money endeavor, people can have different tasks that they want to do at once. And I show them how using their own premises. I don't use the phrase using their own logic, right? We don't have our own logic. We have our own premises. Logic is not contradicting yourself, which everyone either does or doesn't do. And if they don't do it, then that's bad, quite simply. It leads to bad contradictions. But using their premises, then if it's true, like if someone says to me, I want to rank a website and I want a network to get clients, then and if they have to at least get started with either one, I said until one of them's kind of on a timer, like if you make some networking appointments with clients, then you're waiting for those appointments to happen. Maybe they're next week. Then of course that's on a timer. But there's before the timer starts involving other people, either one of those things could involve just work that you could do, and you could do one or the other during a particular hour. And I point out to them, if it's true that you can do both within the next few days, then isn't it also true that like if you can do both within 2 days, within the next 2 days, or you can make progress on both, then isn't it true that if you just work on one of those, then either you'll finish it, right? You can just do the math, right? If one of those tasks until it needs to be put on pause would take 10 hours, and the other one would take 10 hours, then isn't it true that like you could just if that's true, then you could just do one for 10 hours and finish it, and isn't that probably going to be more efficient than switching back and forth? So if they get angry, you stop. That's helpful. Perhaps I should have not continued with them when I experienced the anger just intensify. Right, because you'll kind of reinforce their own resistance. You'll get them to reinforce their own position. And so, yeah, if someone's going to get upset, then I try a different tactic, and I wait. I'm patient. I even do this with the people I'm working with. Like, there's ideas that I'd like people I work with to figure out and get, and I'm patient. It could take years till there's the right time, and the same person will just have times they're more open and times they're less open, right? Or someone starts dating someone and they're all on a high, and their brains give them basically all the effects of like drugs, right? And then if there's issues with how they're behaving in a way that could, like, is counterproductive for themselves, it still might not be the time to try to put the brakes on it. Maybe there's a time you just be patient, and there's times that come up, or you just don't have an idea yet, and you might think of an idea of but not of like something to say to them, but more of like a question to ask, or I don't know, just time is going to be on your side generally, right? And so forth. So. There's, of course, the stereotypical and sort of correct thing. If they feel heard, they can expand on their position. The more they're able to talk, the better, right? Because they're giving you more of where they're at. They're giving you more premises that you can work with to show contradictions. When you show something's a contradiction, don't jump up and down and point at it and say that's a contradiction, by the way. You don't have to say anything. You just ask them the question. So you could be like, so how would you do both? Would that be the case and this be the case? Just say something like that, but not like, aha, I got you. More like you're genuinely curious, and then they might be like, I guess they couldn't both be. Yeah, and I'll get into stuff with specifically with influence and relationships. I'm actually thinking that that'll be the thing I do the next two sessions, and I have a number of things to share about that. So that'll cover this too, that kind of thing. Susanna said, interesting example about the shoes and the clothes. There would be fewer divorces if two people could see things from a person's perspective. Oh my goodness, yeah. And this definitely helps me hugely. And when you can see the other person's perspective, and until it's valid, and then if there's a fundamental contradiction you can't live with, then you can identify that presumably before you commit to the person. Once you commit, you generally want to commit unless there's a real major issue. It seems like so many people want to be right. Oh my goodness, absolutely. And of course, that's one of the big things in alchemy. If we just get over that block, and then as I talked about last webinar, what you don't want to do is like loosen it up, but then protect some things that you still need to be right about regardless. You want to just open up to where, why would you want your brain to need to be right about anything except for if it is? And anything that your mind is already right about, it's not going to be in danger of examining, right? It's only going to help you to understand why it's right better so you can communicate it better to other people. That's the case with the whole God question. That's why people that do believe in God should care so much about opening up the question and seeing it for real. It's not in danger if it's true. And then if you open up the question and get it right and understand how to know properly, then you'll be better able to lead other people in the same way. Megan writes, thank you so much, David. This session's incredibly helpful. Understand and win with clients first, then make the call, the offer, the video, the email. We'll listen again as soon as you post it. Yeah, absolutely. And mostly following Cotton's like direct strategies will take care of most all of this. If you have good velvet rope, if you have like a clear system, then you don't have to guess nearly as much about the other person's mind. But on the other hand, there's a number of demonstrations of competence that Cotton might have in his favor that another person might not have, right? And so then this can really help you. John Ferguson wrote, thanks, David. It will be challenging to try this without actually reading off this checklist, but I'm sure a lot of fun too. Oh, that's so funny. Oh no, totally try it with the actual checklist first. You can write down the actual checklist and do it that way. But it's pretty, I think it's pretty easy to like memorize. It's not, I really don't have a lot of these checklists, or I talk about this with accelerated learning, or just warn you about it too. A lot of things are just sort of gimmicky and there to kind of make the teacher sound like they're giving you a lot of stuff. But I really try to boil things down to just the essentials. And that's within 3 hours. Right, still talk plenty, even with that. Megan said, I'm pausing to learn to get into people's minds before calling. This helps with so many things to add to get it better and more right. Wonderful, Megan. Oh, absolutely. And what I covered in this session, in practice, I really look for this. Like there's some stuff that theoretically sounds helpful. Learning styles is one of those with accelerated learning. Like some people say they're more of a visual learner, more kinesthetic, more auditory. I find in practice, I don't really use that. It doesn't really help me. And I don't really see it helping other people that much. There's like anecdotes to where, oh, it's so helpful. But I can testify to you that, or like certain memory techniques I don't really use, especially to make money or my relationships or romance. But this, what I gave you today, oh my goodness, this is one of the major practical things that I do to be successful in personal relationships and in business. And I really do this. This is not BS, something that I don't do. I do exactly what's on this slide quite significantly. I don't mean that before every conversation I have with everyone I go through this entire thing, of course, right? But I use this, and I use it pretty consistently, and I use each of those elements. Thanks, David. I did not get to see the webinar until now, but I catch up on with the rest. As Mike said, taking notes, listening to these videos is really something. Microsoft OneNote, awesome. Respect goes a long way, absolutely. And I'll be talking with Alchemy. We want to look at what we want to construct a meaning of respect that's clear and makes sense, and that we can do. There's a lot of things that it means kind of by association that are kind of blurry and so forth. So understanding respect properly is one of the major things that we'll want to do as we understand influence and relationships. All right, well, the next 10 sessions will be pretty focused on application. As I said, probably influence the next 2 times, and continue with things like offer, and there'll be plenty of stuff that we can do that'll be applied for business. And I'll use romantic stuff kind of anecdotally as examples and stuff here, and in that way I'll be kind of helping you and teaching you that too. But I'll mainly use business as the go-to thing to apply for the next 10 sessions. Wipe the mantelpiece clean before engaging. This is Michael Monaghan wrote, proceed without judgment, all the while being omnifocused on fully understanding your target as best as you can. In one of Michael's archetypical, as Mike presents things with his statements. Thank you, Michael. I don't disagree at all. That's definitely an angle on explaining this. You are very welcome, Michael. And you're welcome, Julie. And you're welcome, everyone. Great session. When I say great session, I mean I'm talking about you guys and our interaction or in just a quick little, anyway. But I'm not like, don't interpret that in the wrong way, basically. But excellent. You are welcome, guys. Thanks, David and all alchemists. I like that very much. Exactly, and I like us calling all of us, we're at the point now where we can refer to each of us ourselves to the extent that you want to as alchemists. We don't need to think of apprentice alchemists or anything else, but taking on the identity of being an alchemist I think is a wonderful thing. Wonderful. I need to get a stamp, like a badge. You're very welcome, Rick and Brian. You are welcome. Okay, I will end things here and look forward to next week with you guys. You're very welcome, John.